I think what comes down to on the Moonboard is that there's a higher percentage of strength requirement and a lower percentage of technique. And so that doesn't mean like, I'm just going to say arbitrarily, 80% of the send is just having the raw power. And if you don't have that raw power, it's not going to happen no matter what. But then you have 20% of technique. And now if you have unbelievable amount of power, maybe you only need to apply 5% of your technique. But that doesn't mean that you can't spend forever on refining the technique and getting it to 19.9999999% of what it takes to help you up the climb. And so technique will always be infinite. Like you can always get another little micro adjustment. So technique is always required. It's just in some climbs, the power requirement is so clear and obvious, and you have to have that. It's more binary. And now technique is where you can get that extra little bit. And so that's why we're always focused on technique and why power is always going to be part of the equation. All right, Tim, my dude, how's it going, man?
Josh, what's up? It's going pretty good.
I'm like almost laughing for the intro. Tim, okay, I'm going to start out by telling you it's almost snowing right now. I just got a
What?
notification on my phone that there's snow coming. The ski resort right next to me is open. It is fully winter, and I am fully psyched. I love winter.
Wow, dude, I love the snow. I like the rain. I like the weather. I love it when it's just raining and snowing outside. But I feel like snowing specifically, I think does allude to that rock climbing feel. Alludes to Christmas presents and hanging out and just like I don't know. It's cold, but you can bundle and get warm inside. I love the snow vibe.
Yeah, I hate
I'm
the
excited.
when it's hot, like it's just hot and you can't take off more clothes, but you can always put more clothes on and do stuff outside. And the one thing that's going to be interesting this season is that I have a little bit more time hopefully, and I'm going to try to climb it here in the winter. And I'm not used to this whole style of digging stuff out with a shovel, tarping or brushing things
Right.
off. I've got a little project. I'm pretty psyched on Echo Chamber, which is this new yeah, I don't know, newish V14 that David Fitzgerald put up. And he was the one who told me to go suss it. And then your boy Danny did it, Tristan did it, and it's cool. And it gets a lot of sun. It's not too far off the road, so I can kind of like snowshoe in. And I'm just kind of looking forward to doing that. I don't know what you call it. Just like there's a side of me that just you show up at the gym, the climbs are set. You climb the board, other people set the climbs, and you go outside, you climb the classics, and it's very different to have that approach where you are the one who's digging it out, brushing it off the top. And I've done some of that, but I'm usually not the guy who's like leading the charge. So I'm looking forward to experiencing that whole side of living in the mountains and having a project that gets buried.
Nice, dude. That sounds like a lot of what Roman was talking about, what he loves, and actually got me pretty excited to do something like that or get into that at some point in my climbing life soon. So it's pretty cool that you get to do that. And yeah, I guess, have you spent how many seasons in Tahoe have you lived or like gone out and actually climbed?
This will be my third season. The first one, I had just moved here. I was just coming off of shoulder surgery, and I spent it
Right.
really repeating a bunch of stuff. Last year, I I had kind of tweaked my shoulder, and then we had that snow, and I had like a 6 month old second kid, which kicked my ass as I've complained about a bunch. And I just skied a bunch because it was snow apocalypse here, dude. We got like 50 feet of snow. There was no shoveling out stuff here, and the skiing was so good. It was, I mean, arguably maybe it'll be one of the best ski seasons I've ever seen in my life and never will see. So, sometimes you got to just take a hint from the world and enjoy the outdoors, however it's asking you to. So this is, I don't know. I'll say this is my first season where I don't have a bunch of low hanging fruit of just like, oh, I should tick off this classic. And I'm looking also to kind of dig my teeth into a project. And this one looks good.
Yeah, it's fun, dude. I mean, it's been a long time for me since I've kind of started a process on a climb and kind of repeated going to a climb. And obviously, I just took a couple of weeks off to travel, but it's been nice trying Sleepwalker and just going back and setting the pads up, doing the same routine, like, trying to feel even just the smallest bits of, quote unquote progress or how things are going. And it's definitely going to help create some more content for the podcast and stuff. So at least that'll be nice for both of us projecting again. Will be nice.
It cracks me up, Tim. You were saying, I don't want to, I'm not the kind of guy who goes and gets on the climb of the moment. And now everyone's doing Sleepwalker. Like you are fully in the most popular hard climb in America right now. I feel like that's
I
the
know.
one
I hate
that
it.
everyone's ticking off. Dude, you should just be driven by what your psyche is. And it seems like you are. Don't worry what other people are doing. And
Yeah.
I'm still rooting for you. I mean, dude, it's a really cool climb, great place.
That's the only reason why I'm trying it. Yeah, I couldn't care less about the whole aura behind it, but it is just a phenomenal climb. It's pretty cool. It's hard to focus on that when it is just there's so much news and so much Reddit and whatever. There's so much back and forth about it in the community.
I'm not a big Redditor, but sometimes I do stumble upon it. And I am amazed at it. I mean, it's really cool how vibrant the community is there, but there's so much anger and shit talking. And
Dude,
something that's really cool is, Drew Ruwana is on there. And it's so funny to see people like you see all these people chattering about, some climb. And then Drew comes in, it's just like, bam, like this is what Drew Ruwana thinks. And it's really good because it's just nice to see a bunch of armchair experts, which, sometimes that's us too, but hopefully we don't give too crazy strong opinions about things that we don't know a ton about. And then Drew comes in and he is the definition of not an armchair expert. And so, yeah, just love that he's in there. Not that he's in there like, putting the gavel down and saying like, you guys are a bunch of idiots and I'm Drew. Just nice I think it's a really cool service he does to go in there and, share his opinions.
I think that is nice. I think it's very important to check all the armchair experts. Like, I hope there's no back and forth beef between Drew and the other people because I've thought personally about getting in on some Reddit things and just being like, look, guys, there's a lot of misunderstanding here. There's a lot of assumptions that I don't think are so accurate. But we won't get into that nitty gritty.
Okay. Well, today I am the ultimate armchair expert because I did the most old man thing ever this weekend. I hurt my back while building a climbing wall. I was like, I already have a moonboard. I love my
No.
moonboard, but my kids who are about to be 4 and I've got a 1.5-year-old and they come out and they want to climb with me. They brush the holds. My daughter will hang off the holds and they're just aching for another wall. So I'm like, oh, I'll build a wall. I can do this. I'll build the wall. And I built a 10-degree wall and a vert wall next to it. And yeah, I was just putting on the finishing touches, getting a few pieces of plywood out. And then I was like, oh, my back doesn't feel so good. And since then, I've just been, yeah, old man walking around. So I don't know. Be careful when you climb
No.
or when you build your wall, Tim. You don't want to do what I did. It's very embarrassing.
Yeah. Dude, massage trigger point. Find a spot that like actually tweaked your back, and it's probably just a muscle that's over tensed, and give it a whole day's worth of sessions. And for me,
Tim,
that always helps.
Tim, I'm this will be the second time I see or today after the pod, I'm gonna go see the woman who does release therapy. I've got the
Oh,
heating
nice.
pad. I'm doing Tim, I got all my old man wisdom on. I even got my old man Vicodin on it too. But the reality is sometimes you just get hurt and it takes a couple of days out of you. But I'm really proud to say that last night, even though I was bumming a little bit, feeling a little sorry for myself, I realized that my back was good enough to hangboard, so I did a little bit of hangboarding. I like
That's so
hobble,
awesome.
dude. It's such an old man. Like I like hobble up to the hangboard and then I bear down and crip and like get my 10 seconds in, and I step off gently and go, oh my back. But I'm trying to. Well, I'm trying to channel that Jesse Grouper vibe where, dude, I that was one of the reasons why I asked him those questions around how do you stay how do you stay positive when things feel like they're stacked against you? And
Right.
his answer was like, I don't know, just what are you gonna do? You gonna freaking give up? And it just
Right.
it
Right.
was so actually he didn't even say it like that. It was just not even an option to him to give up. And I don't know. I love that about him. And so I tried to thank you, Jesse. I channeled my Jesse and I did my old man hangboard routine with a bad back at the same time.
Nice optimism. Hey, I gotta say though, old people, what I've noticed is, older people do get hurt a little bit more often in that kind of just like freakish way where something just happens and you tweak your back, your shoulder, your knee, your elbow, or something, and do generally very little about it. I think that's a thing I can say. I'm proud of you, Josh. You're taking care of yourself and doing the actual
Taking my
thing. So I
Vikes.
always say something like,
That's Vicodin. I just want to be clear. Those are pills of Vicodin that I'm taking to make myself feel better. That's the trick. No, I really did take one, and I realized it wasn't doing anything. You got to move around and do stuff,
oh
but
wow,
it was real bad for a
yeah.
minute there. Sorry, I interrupted you. Talk about
Yeah.
drugs.
Well,
Go
no,
ahead.
no. It's cool that you're doing a lot for yourself though, and but then also that kind of what you're saying, it's like, well, you still get hurt and you take, you just have to take time off. It's like, well, that's just a reality, and that's you know cool to have that mindset as well. But hopefully, you get better in a couple of days, and you stay psyched. And yeah,
Yeah,
when are you going to go try echo chamber next? Actually, I'm curious.
as soon as I can walk out there and hold a shovel. No, probably in the next week or so if we keep good temps and
Nice.
everything. And I got like I don't know. I'm hearing myself say this stuff, and I have a voice in the back of my head around Tim saying like watch your language and not the swear words, but just like it's not good for me to complain about being old or complain about these things happening because honestly like if you bumped into me at the gym and I'm climbing, alongside whoever, I like look pretty young. I climb
Yeah.
powerfully and normal. Like you would never really know. Like people are always stunned when they find out how old I am or that I have kids.
Yeah.
And so it's really, you gotta be careful, Josh, you gotta be careful using this bad language where you put yourself in a mindset that if you say you're old, well then you have all these expectations, and honestly they're negative expectations around it. And it's something I gotta watch, and I encourage everyone to think about that. And thanks Tim for always kind of making sure that you watch the languages you use about yourself because it has power.
Dude, what a good way to kind of that's very similar to our topic for today, or that really highlights a leak in the danger of mindsets, the danger of that language. And that language also, it's funny, the way that you just said that, I didn't realize came from my mom. My mom always used to, so my mom actually was, throughout my entire upcoming, she was a youth pastor. And before that, she was a missionary pastor for a long time, just in Christian churches. And something that she used to tell me a lot when I would like go to school, or like I would just like talk shit about somebody or something that happened in school, like as a child or something, and she'd be like, Tim, like the words that you use have power. Like don't curse people, don't say any things because those things come true. And she would tell me with such a serious tone. I'd be like, oh man, like everything must be like that. And so I took that very seriously growing up. And so thanks, mom, you helped our podcast.
Thanks, Tim's mom. You helped our podcast. Words have power. That's why we podcast, man. Uh, well, while I was sitting on the couch and being an armchair expert, I just wanted to say really quickly that I watched that Ego Death film that Tension put out, and I think I looked at it recently, and it didn't have an insane amount of views. So if you don't know what we're talking about right now, that's fine. It's wasn't the most popular video ever, but it was so damn good. And it was put out, I think it was put out through Tension Climbing, but
Mhm.
Mike Rosado was kind of the guy who made it, and it focused on HP 40, which is a famous climbing area in the South, and it was called Ego Death because, as someone who's been there before, the grades at that place can either make you feel really crappy and hurt your ego because you struggle, or you can just let them go and enjoy it for what it is. And it's kind of thought of as this very technical slopey sandstone place, and my experience there was highlighted by my struggle on Millipede, this very famous V5, which somehow didn't make into the movie. Bumboy was there, the V3 next to it, but the V5 that I literally took 2 hours. And this is like a trip where I was flashing double digits, like, and I got just, and I had a blast on it. And I just, I encourage everyone to listen or to watch it because it's fun, and it shows you it has these amazing climbers on it. Zach Gall is on there. I mean Mike is on there. They're all really strong climbers, and you can see them having fun and struggling their way up these slopey, tricky climbs. And it was one of those few climbing films you see that are just enjoyable even without seeing like V17 get ticked. And I wanted to bring it up just because it was awesome, but because it kind of ties into our topic today. And our topic today is going to be around a learning mindset and an effort mindset. And actually, I don't want to go too much deeper into it because we got other banter to do, but I just wanted to like give a thumbs up to how good the video was and encourage everyone to go watch it. I think you saw it too, Tim. Yeah.
Yeah, I saw it the other day. Um, Yeah, I want to hover on ego death for a second, because I mean, a couple of things that you're saying that I want to echo. It was just a cool film. It's surprising that it doesn't have that many views. Unfortunately, I think like Tension maybe just puts out lots of different types of content and wouldn't usually be known for just putting out like a cool climbing film. I would consider this just a really cool climbing film. I think Mike Rosado did a really good job. He seems to be doing a really good job in all sorts of Tension things as well. I'm gonna read a description from the actual bio of their YouTube video, uh, and it describes what an ego death is. Because I had the same assumption as to like the ego death was correlated to just horse pens in general being that certain style, which totally makes sense. But this is what they write, which I think is very fascinating. So it says, an ego death most often refers to a complete loss of subjective self identity, most commonly associated with a psychedelic trip, which I thought was interesting. In the context of the unique style and difficult nature of Horse Pens 40, an ego death is the point in which a climber must make a choice to either succumb to the incredibly challenging nature of the boulder field or let go of expectation and embrace what the area has to offer, which I think is even more of an in-depth description of exactly kind of what you were talking about, which is that you kind of run into horse pens and you're like, damn, like, what am I supposed to do here? Like, and the one other point I want to make is there's maybe like 15 to 20 climbs in this list, and most of them are in like the V1 to V8 range. And that's the beauty of horse pens is I don't think it's insanely hard bouldering there, but it's one of the most fun bouldering days I've ever had. So I got to go to
So
Triple
fun.
Crown there last year, and I actually won that, which was for me really special because I had heard a lot about horse pens. I had my own, Stingray was the first boulder that we pulled on, and I flashed it, which is that V9 like little mantle thing, and I was like, oh, today's gonna be a great day. Like I could feel the rock, I can really feel the style already, and I was embracing it, and I had a lot of fun. But I could see it going exactly the opposite way, where I maybe didn't even get 10 climbs done for the Triple Crown list, where I was like, well, if I do this the wrong way, and that has to do with the mind, and if I have too much of an ego here, like I'm gonna get screwed. And yeah, what an insane crag, and it's just so special. And I think everybody who's maybe I don't know interested in seeing a new area or going to a new area should watch that film. I think that film is so well done.
On that uh, on that thought around ego death, I want to share my maybe it was 2 weekends ago or something. I went up to check out Echo Chamber, and next to it is this V10 V11 called Eminently Climbable, and it is just my ultimate anti-style, and it just kicked my butt. And I was sitting there. It was in the sun. No, I'm not even gonna blame it. Conditions may have been a factor, but I would have failed on it if I hadn't have done it. And I have friends who are objectively not maybe as good of a climber as I am, and they have an easy time with it. And it really kind of got me. And there was a moment where I got really angry on, really, really upset myself, and just like, why can't I do this? Like it in my head, Echo Chamber seems more doable. So the V14 two lines down seems more doable and easier to me than the V10, right next to it. And I really had to shift my thinking and just say, like there's a lot for me to learn here. Like this is going to be fun, and it's a cool climb. And the thing that is interesting about that whole ego death concept is that there's multiple layers to this. There's the climb in itself and the grade it gets. There's the expectation of yourself, and then there's also when you see other people and your ego gets wrapped up in how they do versus how you do. And look, ego, it's not, well, this will tie into our podcast. Ego is not totally a bad thing. Like you need to have the confidence in yourself. You need to know who you are and put out hard efforts, but you also need to know when to drop in, not like get in the way of your long-term progress. And I just wanted to add that other layer that people don't talk about, where you see other people do it and have success, and you in your head you think, no, but I'm better than that kid, or or whoever it may be. I'm better than them, and so what's wrong with me? And I just you know, watch out for that, you guys. Like, you know, I'm not going to say it won't happen to you, but make sure that you don't become one of those people who, what I see happens in those people who really get wrapped up in getting upset about their friends who climb things better than them and they think they're better than that person climbing that thing, is often they start really avoiding climbs they know they're going to be bad at. So I knew I was going to be bad at this climb, but if I never got on it, everyone knows that that person who says, "Oh, I don't climb compression." It's like, what do you mean you don't climb compression? And but we all know what that means. It means you're not good at it and you're embarrassed to. Don't be that person. Like, if you want to get good at something, be willing to suck at it first.
Mm. I just wanted to stay quiet there because it's like it's just reverberating in my head, like just this wisdom, and it's such an important aspect. I think in my 11 years of climbing, I've climbed less than half as long as Josh has, but I feel like I've had, half of my life absolutely dedicated and intentional into rock climbing and paying attention, competing straight, having projects year after year that are really important to me. And throughout that time, the one thing that I've learned that is the most important thing is the mindset behind what we do, because that can really create your experience. It can kill your experience. It can also be the one kind of north star to get us better, will usually be the mindset. And kind of Josh's story about eminently climbable is what you're saying the name of the climb was.
Yep.
We had a phone call, and this is kind of where this topic for the day came to be. And it was funny because the way that Josh was explaining on the phone was kind of like, yeah, and it was just this experience, and just kind of talking through it. And I was like, that is exactly what we were just talking about. That point right there. And so many people have this experience where it's like, dude, but in this climb, in this style, this V14 field, maybe not for everybody's V14, but for you saying that this V14 almost feels easier and more doable than this V10, V11 crimp line. And it's like, so what? You're right. You're totally right, Josh. You're totally right in that this thing is probably more doable, but why? Right. And once you actually start answering that question, why, and then you start to peel back the layers of your weaknesses, and you're not very, most people aren't that intimate with their weaknesses. They're not that intimate with how those weaknesses actually affect us. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So I'm not going to go deep into that now, but I have a lot of thoughts here. I have a lot of personal experiences. Of course, this all comes from personal experience, not, I was talking with Michaela, my girlfriend, yesterday about this and why podcasting is so interesting for me. And it's because the way that I view myself is that I'm a researcher going out, doing my thing. I come here and I share my research with you guys. So, this is something that I feel really, really strongly about, is this whole ego death concept, but also just the power of the mindset and the danger of the mindset. And that's just one example of an obvious danger of a mindset where you can start saying things, and kind of what Josh was saying even before, you don't even realize you're saying things. You don't even realize you're self-prophesying these negative concepts that may or may not be true, and they may or may not be true, but you'll never know until you're honest, you're humble, and you're confident, and you go for things and you check. And that's kind of going to be the overview of what the topic is going to be today. But before we get into that, we got more banter.
Yeah,
I'll hand it
my
back to you.
banter is just a total 180, and it has to do with our last episode and the Moonboard specifically. Actually, I guess all board climbing. But I got this. I started chatting with Steve Rader, who's just a guy who found us through the podcast, and then he's just an incredible moonboarder. And first of all, he did that Aiden Roberts Moonboard Masters climb, that V12 I'm always talking about, right?
Oh,
It's like
damn.
V12, like actually V14 or V15. So first of all, just amazing job, Steve. Like, that is incredible. But the thing I wanted to talk about that he brought up, and I don't have the best answer to this, it's just something that I want to peel back a little bit, is we talk about how, I don't know if we talk about this, but it's kind of almost unsaid. Board climbing isn't really technical, or it's more about being strong. It's more about like executing, or I don't know how to put it, but I think this is kind of always under the hood of every discussion, where people just assume that board climbing is just a power based thing. And you can contrast that with, I don't know, squamish climbing, like what we talked about with Ethan. And Steve wanted to challenge that assumption and say, wait, like, there's unlimited technique in these climbs. He spent months on that specific climb, refining every little micro beta. And so I just want to explore this concept of, what do we mean by technical climbs, and how are boards climbs, or specifically maybe moonboard climbs, not technical, or are they? And I don't have the best answer to this. I have some ideas. I think it's a fun topic because I've talked about how I learned a lot by moonboards being so narrow and constrained that it allowed me to just hone in on micro beta, because it takes away the infinite choices. And then, well, it takes away the infinite choices in feet, let's say, but then it gives you an infinite amount of adjustment in the feet that you do have. And so what do we mean by technique? How do boards not have are not considered as technical? I just wanted your thoughts on that, Tim.
Yeah, I think I do have a really clear thought into two things why we as climbers like to categorize moonboard climbing into this more like quote unquote powerful way, because it's not like I've always thought about this. If you take any CrossFit bro, bodybuilder type dude, gymnast, you take any strong person and take them into the gym, they're not going to climb that hard, almost certainly. Even if you explain it to them, even if you explain to them how to climb. And we all know this, anybody who's listening to this podcast can have this ego and ownership and think, yeah, I know how to climb, and I could take any CrossFit bro who's twice my size and twice as strong as me, and they could not climb as hard as me. We just know that. That's a truth. There's so much, and that's why we podcast. That's why we go deep into, that's why I'm so personally passionate about the fundamental techniques of climbing. These are all fundamental, man. Like everything we've talked about on the podcast, it's not that advanced, or maybe they happen to be. Every guest that we have on who comes in and talks and kind of reiterates our fundamentals, they're like, yeah, well, this is the things that I've worked on for like 10 years straight. It's like, well, great, because it means you're climbing very, very well. So these things obviously matter a lot. Anyway, so obviously we know there's a deep level of nuance to the technique that we do in climbing. Well, so obviously that doesn't mean that the moonboard is just power climbing either, because we can't throw those people on there. And it's not like they're going to have more success on that board. They're probably going to have less success on that board than any other level of climbing. And so what I find is interesting is what I feel about the moonboard is that it just focuses on the most specific ways to get up that specific wall. And so what I could see is a wide variety of types of boards that exist that do focus on the techniques that are required for those boards, which is really kind of what we talked about on that last podcast about comparing the different boards, is what is required of you to climb up this wall, because that's what you're working on the whole time. And so the way that I kind of view the moonboard concept in terms of like what technique is required, I see that as a minor. So going back to what Josh was talking about, minors and majors, and he always kind of said in a podcast before in classrooms, don't major in the minors, right? Like it's fine to see the effectiveness of using a one-arm pull-up and seeing how that can attribute to more climbing success in other ways. But one-arm pull-ups aren't the end-all be-all. We don't go and talk about our rock climbing and showing like, oh, I can do a one-arm pull-up, so I'm going to be an expert rock climber or whatever. And maybe some people have that misconception, but that's not the truth, right? That's a minor. I think moonboarding, in my opinion, is another version of a minor. And so when you master a minor, even when you go and master a one-arm pull-up, there's a ridiculous amount of technique and timing and strength required to do one-arm pull-up, right? When I was telling Michaela this yesterday, I first did my first one-arm pull-up, I think 6 years ago, like about 4 years deep into climbing. I worked really, really hard to do a lot of pulling, lots of variations of pull-ups. I never really trained a one-arm pull-up, but I could just do one. And then I remember trying to show my friends, I couldn't do it again. I was like, I just did what I swear, like, I don't know, I must have just engaged into it properly, did the perfect timing. And, just because I was strong enough, it didn't mean that I knew exactly how to do it every time. And over time, even when I was able to do like 2 one-arm pull-ups, sometimes I would pull on the bar and be unable to do it. Nowadays, I will never not be able to do a one-arm pull-up. It's not about the strength. Sometimes I won't be able to do more than 3. Sometimes I won't be able to do more than 5. Sometimes I can do way more than that, right? But it's the knowledge of how to execute this really difficult physical and technical movement. That's how I see the moonboard. The moonboard is all these really physically difficult things to do in the climbing realm, but they're very specific. They're very specific ways to do these movements, climbs, how to move on these feet, how to move on these types of handholds. And I've generalized, when I climb on the moonboard, I've generalized so many concepts that I see. And it's not so much learning anymore. When I climb on the boards as a whole, the tension board, kilter board, moonboard, or really any type of board, I'm not learning very much. And that's cool, because it's not why I'm there. It's not why I'm climbing on the boards. I actually climb on the board because I know that. Personally, I already know that I'm not going to learn as much on the boards. I am just there to kind of refine that that part of climbing, which is trying really hard in these specific techniques. And sometimes it's weird, man. Like, you'll just like worm and noodle around certain positions on the board. You get really close hand foot matches. You climb off balance all the time. You put a right foot on, go left handed to something all the time. And that's just the best way to get up a wall. It's so interesting. Like, I do a lot of like, quote unquote incorrect things in most climbing theory. And so that's moonboarding. And again, obviously, so what that means, in my opinion, is that climbing is really about a wide variety of a
Yeah.
wide base of techniques, a deep understanding in all the variations of movement, so you can get up most climbs the best way. And there's very obvious best ways to get up a lot of the board climbs. It's kind of my point there. And but to operate them is really difficult.
I think what really stood out to me when you said all that was this idea that moonboarding is a minor in the grand scheme of climbing, and that's that. That kind of hurts to hear in the sense because I put so much effort into it, and you would like to think it's
Well,
it's
me
more of
too.
a lead domino, and I think it's probably one of the larger minors because clearly, you can look at people who have had a lot of success on the moon board and whether that is what caused them to have success in other domains of climbing. It's there's always some carryover, right? So this is when we say like don't major in the minors. And the one arm pull up is the one I always use as an example because people want one arm pull up. Now, just because people might come back and say, "Oh, look, I trained for one arm pull up and I got better at climbing." It's like, yes, you did. Like that, it doesn't mean that getting better at a minor doesn't make you better, but it's this idea of what's your return on investment, what's your opportunity cost. That effort that you spent on the one arm pull up, could it have been better spent elsewhere so that you would have gotten better at climbing? And then, as we've
Yeah.
both talked, right? At least for me, when I did a one arm pull up, I never did any training for a one arm pull up. I was climbing, and I then did the one arm pull up. And that's always that thing. It's like, what can you do that is the lead domino? So okay, back to the moon board and or boards in general. I was just actually first of all, I want to say that one of the benefits of that moon board is that kind of awkwardness and that kind of going off of the wrong foot. And I remember somewhere along the way in my climbing journey up the grades, first you're kind of awkward, then you realize how to not be awkward. And sometimes you then really embrace technique and you're like, okay, both feet on, I'm going to do this move and keep all my points on. And, you find the right feet and you really embrace that kind of understanding how to feel smooth. And then I remember kind of hitting a wall and I recognized then that sometimes in harder climbing, whatever that means to you, things may not be perfect. Like you might, yeah, not have the heel hook that you just like, I need to have a heel hook. It's like, oh, you don't. So what now? And as you get stronger and more technical, you're often able to make those climbs that felt off balance and awkward much more smooth and more kind of fluid and look good. But I feel like you have to always recognize that when you're really pushing your limits, sometimes you have to get into this area that doesn't quite feel so smooth and nice. And then you see people on the moonboard doing those awkward climbs, and you're like, wow, ravioli biceps made that awkward move look real pretty. So maybe it's me. Okay, back to this idea of technique on boards. And my way to answer this issue that Steve brought up, and he's just a moonboarder extraordinaire who's done it a lot. And so I know that he's gone in really deep with these layers of techniques. And when I thought about this question, and just it made me think about what is technique fundamentally, and then how does it relate to sending a climb, and how is that related to power? And what I think happens with the moonboard is that if you think about a climb needing a certain level of power and a certain level of technique, every climb needs some blend of both. Like you have to have some level of technique. Just like Tim
Right.
was saying, someone can come along and be unbelievably strong and they do CrossFit or gymnastics, but then if they have no technique, then they can't send a climb, even if they're physically capable. I think what it comes down to on the moonboard is that there's a higher percentage of strength requirement and a lower percentage of technique. And so that doesn't mean like, I'm just going to say arbitrarily, you need 80% of the climb, this is so unscientific. I'm just making stuff up. 80% of the send is just having the raw power. And if you don't have that raw power, it's not going to happen no matter what. But then you have 20% of technique. And now if have unbelievable amount of power, maybe you only need to apply 5% of your technique. But that doesn't mean that you can't spend forever on refining the technique and getting it to 19.9999999% of what it takes to help you up the climb. And so technique will always be infinite. Like you can always get another little micro adjustment. So technique is always required. It's just in some climbs, the power requirement is so clear and obvious, and you have to have that. It's more binary. And now technique is where you can get that extra little bit. And so that's why we're always focused on technique and why power is always going to be part of the equation. We're never here to say like, don't get stronger. But technique is that thing that in that moment, and and it's something that you carry with you again and again and again as you learn your tricks. Maybe next time you step up to a moonboard problem, instead of starting at 5%, you start 6% because you learned something, and now your body moves in this special way that you got from the moonboard. So this is just, you guys, I don't want people to think this is exact and perfect. This is just my thought.
Right.
Yeah.
And that idea isn't exclusive to moonboarding. The idea of the differences in what you focus on and what percentage of what, how much of the technique can you actually use. And of course, you can refine that over time, even if you don't possess the power. That's not exclusive to moonboarding. That's climbing. But the moonboard, what I heard from you there is that the moonboard, because the percentage of moonboard climbs that have such a high prerequisite of strength required and power required to even do those climbs, we just noticed that aspect of that, that strength requirement in moonboarding so much that we don't focus on the technique as much. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't, though. And so, yeah, and what I hear from that kind of underlying tone is, especially this guy, Steve, really good moonboarders do look really technical. Someone like Ravioli Biceps is really technical on the moonboard. I watch him climb and I'm amazed all the time when I watch him climb. But at the same time, it's still less notes. It's just simply less notes than the vast majority of other climbing styles. If I would be infinitely more impressed if Ravioli could replicate that success on all other styles and forms of rock climbing, which I'm sure he could. I'm absolutely sure he could. I'm not saying that he can't. I'm just saying I wouldn't expect it, because that's why I think the moonboarding is a minor, and another point here, if Ravioli did find success in replicating a lot of the styles relative to the styles that are required in other styles and forms of rock climbing, I would not say that the moonboard gave that to him. I would say that is an aspect of himself that is just good at rock climbing and him. So that's how I can kind of peel back those layers and see that the moonboard is not the lead domino there. It's a minor, and we're using it to develop ourselves.
And that's why people like Ravioli Biceps and are impressed by him. It's not, it's a quality of him that showed that when he focused his efforts on this specific thing, he is both strong, but also really went in deep, and he climbs beautifully on there. And I agree where I know he climbs outdoors, and we gotta get him on here at some, I know we'll end up having him on here at some point. And it's not like he doesn't climb outdoors. It's just, that's where he has put his focus and effort. And so of course he shows a better mastery in there. And I'm not going to talk about he loves it, and good for him. And I just want to highlight one last thing on that strength requirement. Just make it like really clear what we're talking about, where the strength is kind of binary, but the technique is a little more, adjustable. I don't know. Adjustable. I'm going to say that. Okay. Wolf is a really famous V10 on the 2016 set. And I haven't actually tried it yet, but it culminates in a big jump from 2 yellow crimps to another yellow crimp. And you have to hang this left hand yellow crimp, and your feet are going to cut. Maybe I'm pretty sure. Again, I haven't tried it, so I'm almost sure that your feet have to cut. And the point being that, let's say I pushed someone up into that ending position, and they took their feet off. If they can't hang that ending position, they cannot do wolf no matter how much technique they employ. So then you can just get into all the little micro details, so that ideally when you jump and latch that hold, you are perfectly your momentum has perfectly stopped. You're straight underneath it. Your hand lands in a full crimp. You're pinched. Everything is tight. Like you can optimize it, and so it's the perfect moment. But if I put you up there and you couldn't hang it, then I don't care how good your technique is. It's just that's the binary. That's the you are not sending. Sorry. Yeah.
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 That's a really good wave. I just sent you a video of me doing it. I put it on my Instagram a long time ago. But I was really proud of that one because
Dude, that's
I
good.
remember looking at that. I also, yeah, I didn't like ever try it, and I think it took me 1 or 2 tries that session, and I just felt really strong. And the main reason why I didn't try it was because I was pretty sure I couldn't hang that crimp position. And here's another caveat there. I could hang the crimp position, no problem. But I knew that the requirement for doing that movement was holding the crimp position with a little bit of swing. And in order to hold that hold with a little bit of swing, my arm needed to be engaged. And that's really where I was like, I'm not sure if I can get to the hold or hold it engaged. It's really specific prerequisite for me to hold crimps like that. So understanding, under all those layers, understanding your strengths and weaknesses properly and really properly, truly understanding your strengths is really important, because that actually gives you an understanding of what you're actually committing to. Do you need to hold the hold engaged? Do you need to hold the hold with height or less swing? What do you need to focus on? Because you are able to control all those things. You're able to use techniques to then control the impact of what movements are. You can do things really straightforward and add all the impact in the world that the climb is going to give you based on you not doing techniques. But techniques can alleviate the impact of certain movements, right? And it can make them the minimum impact required, which is based on that ending position, which I think is a really underrated way of analyzing your climbing, is looking from the end position backwards. It's actually something that I think
Yeah.
in all in all the clients I've ever worked with, that theory comes up at least once in the first session that I work with almost anybody, if not every single person I've ever worked with. We talk about the ending position of your climbing movements. So if there's anything you get from this podcast or this banter, look at the ending position that's required of you. Do you have that strength? Do you actually have that strength? If you do, you can do the move. You can do the move. It just might require technique. And if there's more feet, if there's more ways to grab the holds, there's more technique available for you.
This is why you should push your friends through moves. Take weight off and then
Mm,
find that ending position. I think it's one of the most common quote unquote advanced techniques that I employ and my friends employ that I don't see get used as much as you would think. I mean,
right.
you just maybe it's because people don't like you just gotta literally grab your buddy's butt and push it up and just support them there. And but it really teaches you how to move through it. And then they get to that ending position and you take the weight off and it's just magic. It
Mhm.
teaches you a whole bunch of things, and I like what you're saying. And if you can't hold that ending position, you're in trouble. And maybe it is time to go back to the hangboard. And, oh, I wanted to say, I just as I was thinking about this this spectrum of strength and technique, it made me think of something Will Anglin talks about, where he has this concept where maybe the hangboard is the least technical thing you can do, and it's really strength requirements, right? Like you just I mean that's the whole point, is can you hold on or not. There's hopefully you can figure out how to put all your fingers on and get into a full crimp or whatever. Although actually there is a little technique there, and then you can go all the way to the other end of the spectrum, and that's usually complex outdoor rock climbing, where there's people think that there's not a lot of feet, but when you see experts climb, all of a sudden you realize that there is a lot of feet outdoors. There is an infinite amount of feet. And in most cases, there's a different sequence. And even in some of the hardest climbs in the world, Sleepwalker, it is amazing how many different sequences there are. And, just outdoor climbing with all its geometric shapes and feet will be on a different plane, they'll be under you or they'll be around a bulge, or just it's infinitely complex. And again, we can say it's infinitely complex on the boards too, but it's always this spectrum. And where do boards fit in that spectrum? More towards the strength side. And that's why, yeah, actually, and that's not why anything. That just is. And so understand that and use it to your advantage, and make sure not to use it to your disadvantage if strength is something you have in spades and technique is something that we all, well, we can always get better technique.
Yeah.
Okay. Tim, I just love boards. I just want to talk about boards.
Oh yeah, dude, I could have jumped in there, but I'm not going to.
uh, we've gotten just such a good response. They're actually, I would say, not all of our responses to the board content we put out is good. It's somehow like more controversial than other stuff. You say Moonboard grades are easy, or Moonboard grades are hard, or the setting is good, or the setting is bad, or training holds should be wood, not plastic, and people just flip out. And
Yeah.
I kind of get it, but it's funny. It's almost like the stakes are so low. You just have this little board in a little 10-foot all tall board, and there's like a leaderboard on and just people are just into it. But I don't know, I'm okay with that. I'm down to just get
Yeah.
in the mud and just be wrestle about what makes moon boards or other boards good or not. And so yeah, I have fun with it.
I do find it interesting. I think just the nature of what climbing is and how we all interact with it and how we feel about it. I mean, it makes us very, you know, brutally passionate about it, but also we're going to be controversial because we all have different opinions and we're different people. But I think the boards are interesting because of the access. So many people have access to boards. I mean, almost everybody has access to boards at this point. Anybody who's a rock climber has access to boards. And the reason why I don't feel so fired up about it, and I just kind of consume it and have a lot of strong opinions about it, is because where I feel fired up is like competitions, and less people compete. But if y'all competed, if the board people competed, we'd have back and forth arguments left and right about controversial things. What's better? What's worse? Like, we like to categorize competitions in this one format of like this parkour style, but there's a wide, deep net of styles that we see in competitions, whether they're good, bad, we like them, we don't like them. There's just way more opinions there, in my opinion. It's also because there's less majors there, or there's less minors there in competition. There's more majors than there are minors, and so
I don't know, Tim.
it's more deep.
I think the constrained nature of the boards
That's
actually
fair.
makes people even more like upset because it gives them an even smaller thing to argue about.
That's fair,
And
actually.
I
Yeah.
want, we got some comments around. Hey, what about like the decoy board? Actually, Bryce and actually another buddy of mine, Bryce Viola, was like, "Don't sleep on the decoy board." And I just want to say we. I mean, I think you've climbed the decoy board. I
No,
have
I've just seen
not.
it.
I like there is a lot of boards out there, and we didn't mean for that podcast to be the end all be all where we went out and climbed on every board for 20 hours and decided it. It's just our take on kind of the most popular boards that I would say the majority of people have experienced. And so I'm not saying that there's no other board that is better or worse than moon kilter, tension grass, like that's not really what we were saying there. We were just kind of looking at the boards that are the most common. But I will say that a big part of it is this community aspect, is this ability to argue about it, and that is part of the fun. So I think one of the reasons why we probably won't cover some of the less popular boards is that there's less people to argue with about, and that's part of the fun. So anyways,
Yeah, dude,
apologies
if you
to
want,
those we didn't cover.
yeah, if you guys want us to cover boards, ship us a plane ticket to your board or send us a decoy board at decoy, not sponsored. No, I'm just kidding. But if you want us to try things, it really does depend on our access to them, right? And so, like the reason why we talked about the moon board, kilter board, and tension board too specifically was because those are the most generic boards you're going to see in most gyms, and we have access to those. I mean, I think the decoy board, it looks awesome. I would have, I'm sure, great opinions, but I've only seen one in Carbondale. I've only seen one in Monkey House in Carbondale, and I don't even know
which
where
just
another one
closed
exists.
too. That place just closed too.
Really? That
Yeah.
gym like closed for good?
Yeah.
Oh, that's
All
so
right. I don't know
sad.
if it's for good. I
Oh
just
god.
know I have a buddy who lives in Aspen, and that was his closest gym, and he was bummed
Oh,
when
I love that
it
gym.
closed.
Oh, I
Yeah.
love that gym
He
so
really liked
much.
it too.
Oh,
Yeah.
it sucks.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hopefully they'll
Oh,
reopen. I
well.
don't know what happened. I have no insight. Just it always makes me sad when gyms close down because that's that community. You just there was a bunch of people who always met up there on Tuesdays and Thursday nights, had a blast, had a
Yeah,
beer
man.
after, and those people are just dead. It's that place is just dead. Uh, okay.
Man.
Yeah. Okay. Well, on that note of the community loving those boards, and I I want to take a moment to actually this is more like a Thanksgiving moment, even though Thanksgiving is a little ways past now. Just some gratitude for everyone. The Spotify Wrapped of 2023 came out recently, and I got tons of messages. We got tons of messages, Tim, but I'm usually the one on the Instagram, so I just said me. But we got tons of messages from people sharing their way of saying thanks via Spotify Wrapped, and how I just couldn't believe how many minutes and hours you guys have listened to us. We had tons of top fans, which were people who it's their top podcast. I think we had, I don't know, like 600 or something, and thousands of people. We were in their top 3 or top 5. I don't remember the exact breakdown, but just it, I don't think
Wow.
we often realize we don't know about this. And then Spotify really showed us that there are people out there really listening. It just, I don't know, it warmed my heart, Tim. It made me feel like we're part of a community. I think what it does for me is that we have these opinions about climbing. We see climbing a certain way, and sometimes you're not sure if you're in a vacuum, and you're not sure if like this is how other people feel. And we really love this nuance of climbing, the beauty of the complexity of our sport, that it's this never ending dive into, is it mental, is it physical, is it emotional, is it, what's the weather like right now, like, just rocks, plastic, wood, like everything, all these deep nuances that we don't enjoy it being boiled down to sets and reps on a hangboard. And knowing that there's a community out there that feels the same way we do really, brought a smile to my face. And thank you to everyone who sent me or sent us those messages. I tried to type back thank you. I tried to show my gratitude via text, but just seriously, thank you.
Thank you guys. I've felt an overwhelming amount of appreciation recently for the podcast and whatnot. And like if we can provide some clarity and grow as a group together in our understanding for climbing, which is exactly how this all started. Like we just climb in groups, like-minded people, and continue doing that. But we can do it at a large scale with the power of podcasting and the internet and stuff. So it's pretty awesome. I find it really special.
Community is that word for me. It's why I
Yeah.
think I stick around in climbing. I mean, I love our sport physically and the places it's taken me, but I look around at my friend group. It's those people that I met through climbing. Really, I think there's something about our sport where you get to see people at their best and their worst. There's not a lot of things that we do in life where we fail repeatedly in front of our friends. Like, it's like, oh, I fell.
Mhm.
Oh, I fell. Oh, I'm not sending. I'm upset. Or, on a trip, you don't, I didn't sleep. I missed my flight. I'm tired. I'm stressed. And also those moments of absolute elation and moments of danger and fear. And I think it just brings this community really, really, really tight knit. And I love that about what we do. And so I'm just happy to be here building that community. And I'll tell you what, it also really kicked me into high gear for 2024 and just thinking, okay, like let's see what we can do more for everyone. And on that note, just thank you. Just grateful for everyone listening.
Hell yeah.
Okay, that's it. I don't want to do it. I had other announcements, but that was the gold medal one to put out there, and I don't want to spoil it with anything else. So I'm gonna go right
Sweet.
in. I'm gonna go right into my pro tip, which has nothing to do with the topic of the day, uh, and it's really random, but it's about having bigger shoes for climbing. And that sounds weird, but I
Oh.
just want this like frame shift where it's always about how small a shoe you can get into. And that's how I thought about climbing shoes forever. I mean, like literally for like 25 years, 30 years. Now I would watch like my girlfriend is putting on shoes and you see her put it on. And I'm like, those look too big. You didn't even struggle. You just put them right on like that. Like where's your plastic bags? Like you're not even grimacing. They just slid right on. And so there's this mindset of how small a shoe can I put on? And I've kind of recently switched into how big a shoe can I get away with? And I've
Hmm.
actually been upsizing kind of a half size steadily. And I likened it first to my time where I started walking a bunch and my feet like got bigger and I like put on barefoot shoes, that whole barefoot thing. And my feet like got bigger, I swear. And I started upsizing my climbing shoes because they just didn't feel quite right anymore. And I've just noticed that I keep wearing bigger shoes, but my performance doesn't suffer. And I would say now my limit is more, will my heel slip off? Like when I'm doing a really, really aggressive heel hook, is my shoe going to stay on? And yeah, I just would say that there's a lot of benefits from having bigger shoes. And if there's no loss in performance, you're probably going to have like less ankle injuries. It's probably just going to be more enjoyable. And this doesn't mean like go get some big floppy shoes, but just shift that frame of thinking of how small a shoe can I manage to get on my foot to how big a shoe can I get away with.
I like that. Yeah, I definitely want to echo that. I think personally, I'm still on the side, like, because I'm figuring that out as well. Um, and luckily I'm sponsored, so I can have free realm to trying all sorts of shoes and stuff. And the beauty in that, yeah, Tim, you douchebag, you're sponsored, you can try it, whatever. The beauty in that is that I can actually try and experiment a little bit more freely, and it helps because there's so much variety there, and it is impossible to know exactly which shoe and what size you want, because each shoe, even so, I wear Las Sportivas and I'll change between squamas, solution comps, men's and women's, theories, mantras, and they're all like quarter size differences. It's really annoying, like I wear a 38, which is a very small shoe, and in squamas I'll wear a 37 and a half, but they feel like a
That's small,
37 and three
dude.
quarters. Very, very
Tim,
small.
Tim,
Yeah,
you're
very.
you're
I've
6 years like a 6 foot tall dude, and you're wearing that. Like I think
dude.
of myself as wearing small. I think I'm like 30. I think I went from 38 and a half, and now I'm up to 39 and a half,
Okay, yeah, that's
and
actually
like
still pretty
solutions
small.
or
I mean,
whatever. Yeah.
I wear an 8.5 street shoe in almost every type of street shoe, so it's pretty standard. And by the way, for you guys who don't wear Las Sportivas, Las Sportiva does size down quite a bit, like quite a bit more than other shoe companies. So in other shoe companies, I'll wear like a 7 or 7.5. Like in Vitora, I was wearing like a 7 or 7.5, but I think 38 translates to like a 6, which is like 2.5 sizes down from my street shoe, which is just not accurate. But I'll wear a range of 37.5 to 39 in Las Sportivas, and just based on what I like, what it feels, what it's good for, what it's bad for. And I just bought a pair of half a size bigger solution comps that I think I immediately didn't like. Like I immediately were like, okay, these are too big. And so I'm learning kind of like what I can get away with, but they're not even broken in yet. And so I echo that concept though, where my squamas, I definitely got, because I had to wear 37 and a half, they were like a quarter size too small. And those ones I would rather have a quarter size too big. And those ones that were very, very obvious to me. And the biggest thing that I noticed was that when my toes were like knuckled up and scrunched in a box, I couldn't really feel the flexion of my toe, very often. And so I don't think that was ineffective on like granite climbing. I don't think it was ineffective outdoors most of the time, but it's ineffective in learning in the gym. Because I think in the gym I've taught myself that you can really teach yourself how to flex your toes more and be more, precise, and I don't know, move your feet around quite a bit more in the gym. And if your toes are too tight and too scrunched up, you can't do that very well. You don't want to do that on tiny, tiny granite gyms. You don't want to do that on like really small feet, but you do want to do that on like big jugs or like slopers or, more involved aggressive movements. And so it's kind of the allowance of teaching for me was the biggest thing I noticed about getting my shoes a little bit bigger. But great pro
Why?
tip.
Why are climbing shoes and their sizes just have no relation to normal size? I have
It's
I'm
so
an eight and
weird.
a half or a 9 in street shoe also, and I don't know what my loss per, yeah, 7 7, just they, I don't think of, it's one of the reasons why I like using the European sizes for climbing shoes, because it just completely divorces the comparison to the American
Yeah,
sizes that I'm used to. So I don't even care what it translates to. It's a climbing shoe. It has nothing to do with real street shoes. So
totally.
I just think
Dude,
that's, go ahead, go ahead.
what's funny is when I was so I started climbing when I was 13, and I was 4'11" and 70 pounds, very small person. And by the end of my first year climbing, so by the end of my, when I was 14, I was 5'8" and 120 pounds. So I gained, like 9 inches and 50 pounds. I didn't
Oh
even have
my
growth
God.
spurt. I don't have any stretch marks or anything on my back. I just grew an inch a month. I literally just grew an inch a month for like 8, 9 months straight. And I was like, I was so tall from like, I was so rapidly growing, I would miss the door handle. Like occasionally I would like reach down for the door handle and I'd be like, what the hell? I'd be right above it. And I'd be like, what? Like, that's so weird. And like the sink looked far away and stuff. But so I wore a 38 as my first climbing shoe size when I bought my first climbing shoes, which was within my first year. And that never changed. And so my 38s have literally been the size of climbing shoe I've worn since I was 13. And so I think it's kind of like that old like Chinese method of like restricting your shoes and like getting your really, really small shoes,
Shoe
or like
binding.
girls did that
Yeah.
way back in the day, and it keeps your feet small. It totally keeps your feet small, like just to keep your feet restricted in that way. And so I think my feet would have grown a bit more because I'm kind of tall and I feel actually out of balance a lot. Like I associate my imbalance issues to like my smaller feet. But it helps with slabs. Like slabs, it's kind of nice to be like, I don't know, really, really close to the wall. Like it's good for heel hooks and stuff. Like I look at like Brennan's got like huge feet, and when I climb with Brennan a lot, I'm like, damn, like how do you step on stuff? Actually, some slabs are easier for him because his leverage points are different. It's just something funny that I
Pro
thought
tip:
was interesting.
do feet binding. Yeah, great. I think it is hilarious how kids will have these growth spurts. I see it in my little kids where they will grow all of a sudden and then they're just uncoordinated, like they trip over and fall. I think that's kind of interesting. All right, last
Yeah,
thing on a trip down memory lane with shoes. Here was how obsessed I was with small shoes, and I was a little kid too. And I remember ordering size 3.5 Anasazi lace ups, and Anasazi lace ups were like the shoe. So this is like
I love those
1995 or
shoes.
something. Well, this dude, they're like, I mean, they were amazing back then, and they've changed a little bit, but they were probably the best shoe on the market at the time, and they were expensive. They were probably like 120
Mm,
bucks back then, which was a lot of money, especially for a 10-year-old or something. And this was also a time where you couldn't really just go and buy shoes. And especially, who has size 3.5. And so my gym had to order them for me. And then, so there's no
cool.
returns. So I get these shoes, and I'd probably grown in the time since ordering them. And I remember trying to break them in their leather. I would put them on and then sit my feet in a bowl of hot water to try to get them to stretch. And, just this is how the lengths to which I went for small shoes. And so this is where, I don't know, just kind of coming at it from a different standpoint is really hard for me because that, that's like 30 years ago. And, that's how I thought. And now I'm, and again, this is the nuance where I was trying to bring is it doesn't mean go get big floppy shoes. It means, what if you could go a half size up and have the same performance? And what does that mean? Maybe there's better performance. I don't know. It's something I'm playing around with, but I know that it does lead to higher instances of ankle injuries when you can't really land correctly when you have your feet just clamped down. So okay,
Totally.
that's enough shoe talk. Tim, do you want to start? You want to do a pro tip, or should we just go right into the?
Yeah, I have a quick pro tip. It's not related to the concept of what we're talking about either. But and this actually may be a pro tip that I've said in the past, but now we've so many episodes, I'm not really sure. But I added another layer to it in case I've said it in the past, and it's just
Wait,
such a
Tim,
good pro
wait,
tip.
did I do that big shoe as a pro tip at some point? Have you heard me say this?
I don't think so. I
Okay.
don't think so.
Well, I
Maybe,
apologize if I did.
maybe.
Yeah, God, that'd be embarrassing.
Yeah.
Okay,
Well,
sorry.
now that we
Yeah.
know about the Spotify rap, maybe people do listen to every single episode, but I imagine that not every listener listens to every episode, so I think it's fine to repeat some
Okay.
pro tips.
Okay.
But so this one might be a repeat as well. But read thumb chalk. Read thumb chalk when you're sequencing routes or just looking at things or really quickly looking at things. So this actually it's funny. It's funny that one time a long time ago, I remember watching a video that Epic TV put out. Matt Groom was, I think it was Matt Groom or the other guy. They were talking with Adam Ondra, and I think he was doing some on-sites or something. I don't remember the context, but he was talking about thumb chalk. And I remember being so flabbergasted, and don't feel bad if, you don't know what thumb chalk, in context of reading is. For me, it was like so given that I was like, Adam was basically, yeah, and I look at like where the thumb chalk is to know which hand I go with. And the other guy who was, interviewing him was like, oh my God. And I was like, what? Oh my God, what? Like, that's so obvious. Like, you should always look at the thumb chalk, right? And I was like, oh, interesting. So this is not a given. And I was coached to read it. I definitely remember being coached to read it in competitions, because you only have a couple of minutes to read these quote unquote on-site attempts in lead or anything. And so the quickest way to read which hand you might want in whatever orientation is the thumb chalk, because that's the average. And in competitions, it's much more of a given because the route setters do what they want to be intended. But even outdoors, I'll see quite a bit of thumb chalk. Here's a caveat here: more advanced readers of climbing can see which thumb chalks are more likely accurate, because sometimes it is just the chalk. So I do make a note there that, of course, sometimes there's just chalk on the wall, but on average, you're going to see chalk that is more trafficked, and more traffic beta is probably more optimal. And so, especially in the gym, if you want to quickly read things, just read the thumb chalk, and it'll give you a really good understanding of what hand's supposed to go where. And especially when there's cross moves and stuff, if you're like, I wonder, because if it looks close, right? Sometimes it looks close where you're like, oh, I don't know if I want my left or right. The thumb chalk will tell you probably where you want it.
Damn.
I have another note.
Hold
Sorry, a
on, hold
secondary
on,
pro tip
dude.
before
No,
you.
that is
All right,
so
go for it. Go
good.
for
You
it.
have not said that before. I think
Really?
I'm that chuffer cameraman that's like, whoa, that's good. I when you said thumb chalk, I was like, yeah, yeah, dude. I mean, you look for where you might want to pinch the hole. You look for if that crimp could be a pinch. You look for other options, of course. But the idea of using it to help sequence an onsite, I, I don't know if I really I mean maybe I'm doing some of that internally, but I don't know, man.
Mm,
That's cool making that explicit. I that's a
yeah,
good pro tip, dog. I or maybe I just
there's
suck. I don't know. I
way
like it.
more.
That's great.
No, okay, that's great. I mean, like I said, I was taught and coached. I was literally told that to do that, and it would just be and very very early on in my climbing, and it became a part of my sequencing. And I think I take sequencing more deeply than even most competitive rock climbers do. And so the what I've learned, and maybe we'll do a podcast on this or like something deeper, because what I've learned is like this is so. Before we started recording, I was telling Josh that there's like so much more that experts in rock climbing, like a lot of pros, feel they feel the mastery a lot more than they know the mastery. And so, the podcast has really taught me to look inside what I feel and regurgitate it into words. It's really difficult. And so I think I know a lot more on my actual climbing than I, feel I know when I'm talking about it. And this is one aspect, is sequencing. And when I look at climbing holds in the gym and stuff, so it's funny. I come off as like arrogant and like douchey to, like maybe not as advanced climbers, just because of how I talk about climbing. I'll notice that in myself, especially with dating Michaela, who's been climbing for 2 years, and she's very advanced for a 2 year rock climber. Um, and unfortunately, she just hurt herself. By the
Mm,
way, I hope she gets better soon.
bummer.
But when she'll like ask me, for example, she'll watch me climb a lot, and I'll like do my beta, whatever, and she's like, we've learned how to we've learned how to communicate with this, because early on I was like quicker with her, but she would be like, why don't you grab it this way, why don't you do that, and I'm like, no. It's so quickly and just so brutal and cold. I'd be like, nah, I'm not even here to explain that to you, but that is obviously not going to work. And the way that I usually know that is orientation of chalk, orientation of the formity of handholds and like features and stuff like that. If you start paying attention to exactly what your palms and your thumbs and your fingers can and should do in specific formities of rock or holds, and especially in the gym with the creation of new holds is literally, it's infinitely scalable and rapid. You always going to grab a new hold in competition. You have to know what your body should and can and want to do in specific positions and specific orientations. And chalk is, for me, the easiest way to read that. And arêtes, I was that kid, not reading around arêtes, not reading like the thumbs on volumes to find jibs. Like if you can't see holds on volumes, but you see a thumb mark, there's probably something on the other side of that volume, because it's not like you can grab a volume on all points. It's not like if you see just one dot of thumb, it's probably because there's a jib on the other side of that. And almost always I'm correct in there. When I'm looking at a volume and I see thumb chalk, there's probably a jib on the other side, because otherwise you would just grab it wherever you would want to grab it, right? The volume's infinitely grabbable.
Dude,
Sorry, another. Yeah,
hold
yeah,
on real quick, just because I think it's kind of fun to actually show the other side of things that I often I mean, I've struggled with this too, but I see an issue with people who've spent a lot of time in the gym and not as much time outdoors, especially on climbs that are more feature oriented, maybe blocky or granite, is understanding how to spot features that don't have chalk on them but can be used as holds. So oftentimes you'll look at a ret
totally.
and you'll see like a bunch of chalk, and you'll see people like, oh, okay, I'm going to grab this arête at that chalk. But then you'll see really advanced climbers, maybe they're shorter, and they'll use the ret like 8 times on the way to the next hold, or they'll just reach out and find balance from some feature, some not a ret, but when you like, there's like kind of like a roof, and you can almost pinch the roof.
Mm-hmm.
Too hard to describe on a podcast, but noticing that there are almost, yeah, again, there's an infinite amount of holds, and you'll see this in people when you saw volume start to be part of the route setting meta, just being able to grab the volumes. And I'm guilty for when that first started coming up, I didn't use the volumes. I said, where's the hold on the volume, and just so yes, look for chalk, but also expand your movement and understanding and different rock types to recognize that there's maybe holds right in front of you that you can use, maybe not as your primary grip, but maybe you can use that as a bump hold or something that doesn't have chalk on it. So I don't know, just just giving you
Yeah,
crap on the other
that's
side
a
of the spectrum.
that's a really good caveat. I mean, I think again, only use chalk as a kind of the first layer, and everything beyond that first layer, I think about the movement, the theory, like why I should lean this way, why I should then do this, or where's my feet, like what feet allow me to do what do I want to do with the move, and the thumb chalk is just one layer, and I think it should be kept as one layer because there's more depth found in other ways. Another part to this pro tip is read rubber too. Outdoors, especially, rubber usually means the optimal foot, especially if you climb in like rifle. If you climb in rifle and you see this like horrible, greasy, rubbery thing, it's probably just the best foot. It's just probably in the best position. It's probably the smartest thing to use. But there's a lot of little rubber marks that are going to be smears that maybe aren't actually footholds, and you'll see these like huge rubber streaks and big rubbery marks and stuff. That's not a foothold. It's like, well, step on it. It's going to help you. And then learn why it helps you. In the gym, look for effective smears. There's so many volumes and features, and like what I see, I look for rubber on the tops and backs of holds, like on the back, where you can't actually grab the hold by your hand, but on the other side of it, there's usually probably rubber on it. If the move allows you to do that, and so looking for that rubber will help you kind of guide. And so when I climb in the gym, I think I'm kind of known for climbing pretty quickly, and I'm not reading everything, but I'm mostly reading those two things: is thumb chalk and rubber. And I can move usually pretty accurately to the most optimal sequences. And otherwise, my intuition just kind of kicks in and makes smarter decisions to adapt.
This reminds me of an experience I had in Kalymnos a few years ago, and I was climbing. I was on sighting something that wasn't crazy hard. It was probably like a 12C or something, but it was 50 meters. Just this classic Kalymnos. It was on the panorama wall, dude. By the way, Kalymnos, amazing. You should go there, Tim. And it's limestone,
I want to go.
and limestone gets polished, so you can really see those boot rubber marks. So the climb I was on was an extension, and I'm up there, and I'm just pumped. Like I am just pumped out of my mind. I am not in sport climbing shape. I've been on the Moonboard, and this is 50 meters of overhanging tufas. So I'm cruising along, and I get to kind of what seems like the crux, just my hunch. But I'm pumped, and I don't want to. I want to try hard. And I look down, and I see a foot, and it's like higher than I want it to be. And I see the other foot. It's really far out there. It's that cool like tufa 3D climbing where what it really is it's almost like stemming. And I just know from boot rubber, like that's the foot for the move. And I just get up on those feet and I just commit to it. And the move just goes perfectly and beautifully. And I onsite the route. And it's just this interesting thing where, maybe this isn't, super high level climbing where it's like the best pro tip ever. But sometimes just when you're on sighting and cruising around, just, yeah, be aware of, is that super pure on site or not? I don't care. Just look at those holds, see what they're telling you. And oftentimes you're right. The most trafficked stuff is the best beta, or is quote unquote, it's more likely to be very good beta, we'll say. And then you just commit to it. And it's something that I often would show my girlfriend or wife at the time, or wife now, is like, where's all the chalk? Like, where are your feet? Like, because I would always joke, because she got brought up in the climbing gym and got strong quickly, and then we'd take her outside and kind of marionette her. And I would always joke, like, if I put tape on the wall, you would climb 2 grades harder. But in some ways, there is tape on well trafficked climbs. That's the foot. That's the foot. Like, oh, it's too high. I know it's too high, but that is the foot. Commit. So yeah, love it, dude. That was
Yeah,
fun.
love it, love it. Okay, can we jump into this wonderful topic of the day?
Yes, yes. And I'm
I
gonna
have a go for it. Go for it.
I just want to preface this a little bit. So, our topic of the day is about the learning mindset, and I think we're going to call it the effort mindset. And I don't want us to come across here and say these are all the possible mindsets. This is the exact breakdown of how to climb hard. This is just two modes, or two mindsets that me and Tim have talked about before. And we really want to make a clear delineation between the two. And we think it will help you tackle hard climbs, is understanding when to be in the learning mindset, when to stand, when to understand, when to be in the effort mindset, and how they're related and how they come together. And so, I'll hand it back to you there, Tim. But I just don't want this to come across as like this is the Bible for climbing hard. This is everything. It's just this is one way that Tim and I approach climbing, have noticed in climbing, and actually to bring it back to something you said around feeling versus talking about it, and you used the word, Tim, you said I feel things and then having to regurgitate it for the podcast. So regurgitate basically means throw up. That's why I like to use the word articulate, and articulating means to turn something into words, and it is very difficult, and it is what we enjoy here. Is it's so tempting to talk about climbing in very concrete terms of grades or finger training or quote unquote strength or quote unquote technique, and having to articulate the infinite nuances of climbing is what we all really actually are doing and enjoying when we're out together and talking about. And so anyways, I've learned a lot from having to articulate my feelings, and this is something that we are noticing that we are going to articulate and break out. But I don't want people to mistake this for being like this is all there is in climbing. These are the only mindsets that exist. This is just a tool that both Tim and I have used and understood and are making apparent or making or articulating. Yeah, okay, I'm lost, Tim. Go ahead.
Dude, I couldn't do this without you, man. I think you do a really good job of kind of balancing my because I think my attempt is to regurgitate things that I already feel, and
Articulate, Tim.
I do
Articulate,
I do
not
articulate
regurgitate.
them.
Okay.
No, but I naturally just like opt to regurgitation mode, but articulation is like what I try to do. But you're so good at the articulation, and yeah, I'm learning a lot. But also I have these like deep theory concepts that do matter to me a lot. And, I think amount or have amounted to, quote unquote success or probably failure. And, kind of trying to help you guys not run into the same pitfalls that Josh and I both run into regularly still. And, things that I'm like, these are the things that if you had told me before I started climbing, I actually would appreciate and I would like to hear. And so that's what we're attempting to do. But yes, all good caveats. This is not the whole gold mine and mindset is not what we're talking about. And this will help. I titled this whole podcast, section, how to conduct in climbing, because we talked about it when we
Oh
were talking
yeah, I
about this
like that.
topic.
That was fun.
I was asking you like, who's the guy who in music, in like orchestras, who's the guy in the front like holding the stick, and he's like, oh, the conductor. And I was like, oh great, okay, think of you in your brain as the conductor for this orchestra that is your body. You are responsible for knowing theory, whether that's visually or by feel, handling rhythm and flow, it's pacing, rev control, aggression, and essentially making all of the little and big choices. So you're the conductor for the orchestra that is your body, and we're climbing, right? That's how I view it. And the reason why we talked about this, like I said before, was kind of, well, actually, we were talking about Ethan Salvo talking about the learning mindset and the beauty of it. Nathaniel Coleman talked about the beauty of that kind of awareness and learning mindset as well. And of course, these two climbers have aspects of learning mindset and the effort mindset, which I also call the aggressive and the committed mindset. Which so then you can kind of see why those are kind of related.
I like committed. Yeah,
And
that's
again,
good.
mhm. And I see Jesse Grouper. We just had him on the podcast as well, and I think a lot of his mindsets do go back and forth in between the two. But we obviously value in certain instances the learning mindset, and in certain instances we don't value the learning mindset, which means we go hand in hand. They kind of go opposite in mindsets. And I'll just go ahead and define quickly what I think these two mindsets actually feel, and what I view these mindsets are. So the learning mindset is when we evaluate as we go. This way, we can truly be aware of theory that is right and wrong, better and worse. We're allowed to make choices on the wall, but this heavily depends on your internal and external stamina. And so your this kind of just came from talking to Jesse. Is internal stamina was basically his willingness to make the correct choice and actually associate that to objective and rational choices, not so much the choices that he just feels is right and wrong, because those are often incorrect. And then the external stamina, the actual ability to have endurance and be on the wall. That's kind of where we're allowed to make those choices, given that those internal and external staminas are high. And so I kind of make a parenthesis here that This must be greatly improved in order to increase your ability as a conductor, given that you're staying in a learning mindset. And I do value personally, given this concept, I think the learning mindset is what I have taught myself to try to implement more often because it's actually harder. The effort mindset or the aggressive and committed mindset is when we choose to have more certainty and we focus more on the mechanics and the effort of a singular sequence or a singular movement, generally much more likely to get our potential ability to show. But choosing optimal paths relies on a strong theory and quick adaptations, right? So it's a given that your depth of understanding is there in order to actually have this effort and committed mindset to be more effective.
Yeah, yeah. I want to. Those are great definitions. I want to bring up the idea of conductor again because it is this really important thing about just how you approach climbing. And I'm going to actually pull it back to where I was recognizing the language I was using around being old or whatever the negative talk is, and see that's
Yeah.
not the conductor. The conductor is the person who says, "Hey, whiner over in the orchestra complaining about being old or whatever, you need to like you turn it down. Like we need to hear this other
Yeah.
part, you know." And so I just love that. Like, who are you as a climber? And this is where we were talking about. I'm even going to liken it to ravioli biceps and how we all think of ravioli biceps as a good climber. And yes, we talk about his moonboarding achievements, but I would argue that you could probably take the same amount of effort that he put into the moonboard and apply it to a different kind of climbing and that he would excel in that as well. And so this is where you can still be impressed by people's climbing, even if it's in a narrow area, when you understand the approach that they're taking towards mastery. And that's that conductor we're talking about. So that isn't really what the whole podcast is supposed to be about, but that conductor,
Yeah.
that's good, man.
Yeah,
Sorry,
let
do you
me
want to say
actually
anything?
let me
Go
peel
for it.
back
Go for it. Yeah,
more
yeah.
layers to that. Yeah, because a conductor is great to think about, and that's really all we should be thinking about in terms of what we're controlling. But I like what Josh is saying there. Be aware of your orchestra. Be aware of the strengths and the weaknesses that your orchestra has. And I do mean strengths and weaknesses. The strengths can be blinding as well. If your orchestra contains this one guitarist who's just amazing, but your brass and your percussion and everyone's just behind, you're only going to be as good as everybody sounds like shit. Like you're going to have to control and understand like, hey, lead guitarist, you can't take every solo, you can't take every lead on, right? And so you have to understand the strengths that are blinding to you, which is exactly why Josh always says don't major in the minors. So if you're not understanding yet what this orchestra and conductor means, that's what I'm talking about. The orchestra is your styles. It's all the strengths and weaknesses physically that you have, internal things, right? The language, the self-talk, the old man self-talk in the back where it's like, no man, you're way
Hey,
too
old
old for
man,
that.
shut
Whatever.
up. Keep it. Turn off
That's
your
your
phone.
orchestra.
Yeah, I'm sorry. The reason why I'm
Yeah.
just cracking up and making it hard for you to give this great analogy is anyone who knows anything about music is going to be horrified. Tim, I don't think there's any guitarists in orchestra. I think maybe the strings or
What?
the wind instrument. This is not Metallica. This is just an orchestra, like conductors. This is old school.
Wait, no,
And
I watched a
okay,
movie called August Rush where the whole movie is about this kid who becomes a conductor, and there's totally a guitar that he composes or he conducts in this entire orchestra. And you're right in that it's probably rare, but I just thought it was fascinating. I was like, I've seen one. I've
all
seen
right. Well,
one.
this is even more embarrassing because I really don't know what I'm talking about. I'm all percussion, dog. I'm 100% percussion.
Really,
No, I have no
I am a
idea.
guitarist,
That's
so
that's
uh,
my, when I think of what am I as a climber, I identify
oh,
as the cymbals. Just one real try hard. Just boom. Just that's all I got. That's why I'm on the moon board and complaining about those long endurance climbs in Columbus. Okay, Tim. Well, part of the orchestra is the effort mindset and the wait, I was going to say the learning mindset and then effort mindset or the aggressive mindset or the committed mindset. All of those are kind of wound into this, whatever we want to call it. I like committed mindset
the
actually.
conductor. Mhm.
No, Tim, no, yeah, they're all under the conductor. That's why within your
Mhm.
orchestra, these are different areas that you can apply. There's the learning mindset and there's the committed mindset. I think committed sounds better than effort to me because that
Sure.
uh, and so my definition, or actually before I say that the definition, I think one of the reasons why we wanted to bring this up is that we have been talking about the learning mindset quite a bit in the podcast, and Ethan Salvo talked a lot about it. And when I brought it up with Tim, he just really wanted to point out, like, hey, there's more going on than the learning mindset, right? Like that is an important part. But let's face it, if you just get stuck in this loop of like, oh, like, can I get the hold a little bit better? Or what's this body position telling me?
Then you never
Well,
try.
then you never try hard. And if you, and this is where I think about the effort mindset, or the committed mindset, I should say, is this is like, this is maybe the more of the bedrock. In some ways, I'd rather see people just hang it out there and try as hard as they can with crappy beta than spend all day on the
Mm-hmm.
ground trying to get the best beta and trying to refine the nuances and never really trying hard. But they go hand in hand, because what you often want to do is you come up with something that you think may work. You're sitting there on the wall, you're finding some minute beta, or you're trying, you're thinking maybe this is actually a drop knee, but then you can never really find out unless you commit to those mechanics, like you were saying, commit to that try hard and really embrace it. And I think even in that example, that shows you what the committed mindset is, and how it's so different is it is that moment where you show up and put it all out there with the the beta in mind that you are learning from during that during that learning mindset. Man, I'm getting all mixed up with my words, but that that's it. I'm gonna hand it back to you, because
Yeah.
I think that showcases how I think about the two different ones.
I'm going to repeat something you just said because I think it really encapsulates the importance of this topic. Because, we can talk about this we're going to talk about this for like an hour. And so you guys can get lost. But here's the most important part. We really do believe, Josh and I, most expert climbers, I think most expert coaches really do believe that what I would like to see, this all being said, there's strengths and weaknesses, pros and cons about the learning mindset, but we talk about the learning mindset and the value of it. But at the end of the day, what we really want to see is everybody just tries really hard, even if it's wrong. Because you can spend year after year on the same project looking for the perfect beta, but when push comes to shove and you pull on, if you're not actually committed and you're not trying hard, is that really an attempt? Is that really an attempt? That's really, I think, like the core of that kind of effort committed mindset that I'm talking about, is that, are you even really giving attempts? But on the other side of that, in between attempts and during those attempts, do you have an opportunity to learn anymore? Do you even know why you're doing that handhold or that foothold, or why something might be better or worse? Do you even know that theory? And so I just wanted to repeat what you said there, which is, we would rather see people do the wrong thing as long as they're really committed, because that's how you're going to actually have more of an effective experience and learn. And I have said that exact statement in almost every coaching session that I've had. I say it regularly to Michaela all the time. And that goes to show you how difficult it is to check yourself and realize that you're sometimes not in that mindset. And I'll give you guys a couple of practical things to see when you're not seeing, how to assess yourself and see whether you're leaning too hard one way or another. But we have got quite a bit of conversation here. But I did want to make that note really clear. We'd rather do the wrong thing. We'd rather do the wrong thing with the most committed mindset.
Well,
To be
and
honest.
look at that example I gave on that onside of that sport climb, is where I spotted the feet that had a lot of boot rubber. Was that the best
Right.
way for me to do the move? I don't know. I mean, I didn't go back and try a different way, but I just said, "Oh, okay, it's like this," and I commit. It was a bit of a drop knee, and I just really committed to it, and I just did the move. And
Actually, I'll
the
interrupt you.
mhm.
Because your original opinion of that was what?
Not
It's
so
too
great. Yeah,
high,
I
right?
didn't like it.
So
Yeah,
your
yeah.
original opinion was actually not so good, and that was the learning mindset. The learning mindset being aware and actually making, your rational, quote unquote, rational thought. Those are subjective thoughts. You're not actually being rational. You're not, and that's what you have to notice is, and that's kind of why we started with me kind of picking on Josh's words, saying, "Oh, learning mindset is so good, so encapsulates every." I'm like, no, it doesn't. It actually can hinder us, right? Because and the smarter you are and the more experienced you are in climbing, this is exactly what I said to Josh about I forget the name of this climb, eminently climbable
Eminently climbable. Yep.
that you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Eminently climbable. In this specific case, Josh was talking about kind of his pitfalls, and I was like, no, I think your actual pitfall was that you stopped believing that you could even do this damn move, so you stopped even trying to do the damn move. And he was like, yeah. And we don't even realize how much of these pitfalls. So going to that example in Kalimnos, and that's exactly what happened. You looked at this foot, you had a negative opinion, but you decided to go straight for that commitment mindset instead. and that was more powerful and that was more effective. And that's just your ability as a climber to be able to choose which might be more effective. But that's on what grade was that climb?
Like 12C or
Just
something.
curious.
Yeah, like mid
Right.
512.
And
Yeah.
so as that scales, you're going to listen more and more to that learning mindset. You're going to listen more and more to that negative bias that you have. And that's just for everybody. Everybody's going to listen more and more to that. That's how I view hard climbing, especially on ropes. Especially on ropes, people aren't climbing near their potential, mostly because they're not very in tune with what they're actually capable of and what they ask themselves to do. And that's what Jesse Grouper was really, really good at, is seeing what he's capable of, which is way beyond what I think people even are capable of, which is much better. You want to shoot for the stars and assuming that your body's capable of more, and then you just you conduct your orchestra to do that.
And I just, when we talk about these mindsets, I always like doing this macro and micro. I just want to point out that in that example of on-sighting that sport climbing Kalimnos, in some ways I had a moment of doing like the learning mindset. I'm like, okay, like I'm not sure what to do here. You maybe have a moment where you go, okay, is this hold better? Should I take it like an undercling? Where am I going? But then when I saw those feet, I just quickly made a decision and went for it. And this is where and commit and switch to just execution. Okay, this is the beta that I'm choosing for this moment, and I'm going for 100%. Like no messing around. And so we can also talk about our whole sessions where we spend all this time, like dialing, like, is this where I want to hold the crystal? And like what percentage of your session is that? And we'll get into maybe you have some practical tips on to both identifying how where you lean and then maybe when to employ which. But I just wanted to show that it can be like a really quick mindset shift too. And one little
Right.
just side pro tip, and this is probably, I think you'll you'll like these. If you're newer in climbing, especially in sport climbing, the higher your feet should go higher than you think they should. Like just as like a general rule of thumb, you hike your feet higher than you think. And I would say often as you get better at climbing, as you get into the higher grades, oftentimes it's like the opposite, where use lower feet and have that tension and get stretched out. And yes, it's hard. Those are super, super broad brushstrokes. But one of my better tips for people, I'm not even going to pick the grade. Hopefully you just know, I know that foot looks high. That's probably the right foot. And then in harder climbing, I know that foot looks low and you're going to have a hard time keeping tension. That's the foot. Anyways,
Yeah,
take it
actually,
away.
for I do have grades. Literally until like 13B, that usually matters, and like it seems like 13C and above, then you got to start to dissect why you want a closer foot or a further foot. But like for me, pretty much anything 13B and under, I'm almost all my feet are as high as they can be because it presets the next positions a lot more effectively, and it just gives you more option for like how to create movements. It might be more uncomfortable, and it might be less efficient to do each movement, but again, your goal, dog, is not to do every move perfectly. Your goal is to do every move, and so you can perfect yourself over time and make small adjustments to perfect yourself. But okay, this will help us transition into common leaks and then optimal execution, I think, of the mixture of these two mindsets. And this is not necessarily just common leaks, but kind of there's thoughts that I have in this realm of where I see, the pitfalls of either mindset and whatnot. Is something that I said before, but understanding your personal tendencies will help you understand which mindset style that you can lean. So everybody that I've coached or climbed with, I already see they naturally lean one way or another. And I used to classify that as like the types of people that they were, like engineers or like more artist type people or like creators. And actually it does end up being that way. In terms of, where do you lean? Do you lean to be just more committed and you think a lot less, or do you just think way too much and you just never commit? Right. And you as climbers, whoever's listening, you should start thinking about that for yourself. Which way do you lean? Because you're going to do both. Like I said, everyone does a bit of both, but people definitely lean too hard one way. Josh and I, we both lean way too hard in the thinking mindset very often. We're really quick and easy, and we're very confident in going for the committed mindset. We've taught ourselves that. But honestly, when we get into the minutia and we're less confident, when we don't have that prerequisite of confidence, I know that him and I both go way deep in like thinking about making things perfect, and then that can just get in the way of trying really hard. And I had to be taught this by Justin Strong, actually, and he really helped me out of this mindset. And pretty much since then, I've taught myself the opposite way, and it works really, really well. I know that my body naturally and my mind naturally leans towards this learning mindset, so I almost always climb with a committed mindset now. I almost never lean into the learning mindset because I just know it's there. It's just I just can never escape it. Most people seem to jump back and forth, but rarely mix the two during singular attempts. And again, that's really difficult. And I'll go into the practical of how to practice that and how I've practiced that. But I'm just kind of making a statement there. And you guys should everybody should realize that people rarely mix the two during the same attempt, and that's possible. Leaning too hard one way, and so I guess I'll go into why it's not so good to lean one way. Leaning too hard one way for a long time can create gaps. Can create gaps in your theory or ability to perform consistently. You can create and there you go. Josh is eminently climbable. Just seeing the difference in how he feels about a V10 to V14, that's a huge grade disparity, right? But it's real and it's true. But he really feels like they're close and great. That's why, because he's leaning too hard one way in just that one style of climbing. You can create a bias and an understanding that may not be true. And this is kind of where I bring up Josh's story. And that mostly happened because based on previous experiences and the combination of a learning mindset, he was unable to give 100% effort, focus, and thinking and clarity, right? There was no clarity in terms of his approach. If I took Josh's body and I put it into a new climber where he had no experience of climbs whatsoever, but I gave him his body and his technique and however that would work, and then I put him in front of eminently climbable, he'd probably have a better time. I would almost have certainty that he would have better time, be more successful, less negative, and just go for 100%. Because it's just a challenge, dog. It's just a challenge of climbing. Maybe he would give me an inaccurate grade reading afterward. He'd be like, it's V12. And I see that all the time. And that's also why grades are back and forth and wrong and whatever, because people don't realize their personal biases and what's actually quote unquote difficult or something they're actually just bad at. Ego death. This is where ego death is really a truth,
Yeah, I want to jump in here because it's something that just, as I reflect on my experience, and I said this to you where I never blew off of a hold. Like they were small holds and,
Yeah.
on just a slightly overhanging wall. And this is kind of my weakness, objectively, not even just me, what is it? Letting my negative orchestra person take over. It's an actual weakness of mine. And yeah, I never blew off a hold. And what I was thinking about too is oftentimes you see someone do something and maybe it is in their quote unquote style and they do it well, but what you don't realize is how hard they're actually trying. And people see me do things in my style and they'll be like, wow, that looks so easy. I'm like, dude, I was trying seriously hard there. I really put all on the table, and yes, it looked good. And so sometimes I this is just me thinking out loud and learning as I'm breaking this down with you, is I recognize that what I wanted it to do, what I wanted that hold and that move to feel like is just easy, but it probably will never feel easy. And I was never willing to actually commit to it. And yeah, like I said, my hand never popped. And so how hard was I trying? I mean, not the hardest I can try. That's for sure. I coming back away from it. That's for, although, this is where it's interesting because when we, to I don't know if this is worth peeling the layer off, but there is an element of when you're projecting something, you have a certain amount of energy and skin. And so when you're in that learning mindset, you're kind of like, is this going to work? Is this going to work? You're kind of, trying things at 30%, 40%, I can't tell you how many times I pull on and I go, no, this body position isn't right. No, I'm not even going to try the move. And then you say, okay, this is the bay I'm going to try. And then you give it 100%. And so it's funny how much do you balance these two mindsets, based on skin and effort. And that's just, God, that's a whole nother layer. But anyways,
no, that is interesting though. And so the other side of that would be interesting to peel back a layer of is competition, because you don't have an opportunity to do that. You can never go up a ladder and feel holds. You can never make, you have 4 minutes in a bouldering round with no attempts and no information to figure it out and get it done, which are two completely different things, is figuring out a climb and getting it done. And outside, you can feel it and give less effort. It's a great pro tip, maybe don't give 100% effort until your learning mindset has done its job. But sometimes the effort is required to have a learning mindset be a part of it. So it is a really interesting layer that you're talking about. But yeah, all things interesting there. I'll just jump into the next little kind of leak that I see, and this will be kind of last one I talk about. But feelings can be built to be inaccurate, I think, is one of the biggest points to be made here. or at least biased from strong negative opinions or unsuccessful experiences. Your whole feeling about I love what you were just talking about in terms of, you never fell, like, really, like, you never actually fell. You kind of just directed yourself to, you kind of self prophesized that you were failing because it didn't feel good and it didn't feel perfect. And that's just what you're used to doing in your style, which is a really, like, important leak to understand. It's a really important leak to peel back the layers of and understand as strong climbers. So this is one that, so here's an analogy that we all can understand, like, just because you're really, really, it's almost worse to be a strong CrossFit bro or like a really strong weightlifter or gymnast and go into climbing, right? Because you're preset understandings of what's successful or what's strength, it gets in the way of listening to the climbing, right? This goes hand in hand with all of our podcast things of how to listen and how to look at climbing theory, how to break apart mechanics and actually how to do that stuff. Well, if you're too strong, buddy, you're not going to learn that stuff, right? And so that's why I said earlier on that the stronger you are in climbing, sometimes it makes it even harder in the mindsets. Actually, I think it's the hardest place to go back and forth between mindsets because you're so sure. You're so damn sure about other previous experiences, but we have to acknowledge that styles are completely different and that our strengths and weaknesses are probably, bigger disparities than we think they are. And versus us telling the climb what we were supposed to do, we try 100% and we figure it out, right? I love this aspect of climbing, Josh. I love going to the gym and just like dancing around, like getting things done because it's so easy to read general concepts in the gym. And it's actually a huge complaint of mine, like, oh, woe is me, Tim, again, coming on where he's saying that he's just romping up all these gym boulders and never struggles. But hey, isn't that one aspect of climbing that we actually enjoy, is falling and being like, why do I suck here? Like, why? And that's not found for me in the gyms anymore. It's actually a huge issue. When I go to B pump, I can do that on V6 there because it's not correlated to difficulty concepts, it's correlated to style concepts. That's exactly the point here, right? Is that I can hop on any grade of climb and I should be challenged in not exactly feeling confident or knowing exactly what general concept I'm supposed to, um, start using to get me up the wall. And in American concepts, I see the same general concept used over and over and over and over and over and over again in the gyms, and therefore I can get up almost anything in the gyms here, and then I'll go to World Cups overseas and struggle. I'm not really sure how to feel confident on that way, but that's not the point. The point is to try really hard and then be aware afterward, right? And that's kind of where this whole leak that I'm talking about, feelings can be built to be inaccurate. It can be biased from strong negative or positive experiences and create or from unsuccessful experiences. It's your job to peel the layers and learn and then try, right? That's your job. Your job is to actually pay attention to what things are, subjective. And that kind of goes into, it's funny because my practical steps, one of them is to
Well,
see your falls.
before you go
Yeah,
into
go
the
ahead.
practical steps, I think
I was
that
going to, but yeah.
okay, the thing that got me was this concept of, if someone was in my body, it wasn't me, that they would have more success. And it kind of bothers me because you can just imagine. Well, I think about it this way: what if you put me in Daniel Woods's body and I wouldn't know? I'd be like, wow, like my fingers are really strong. It's like, oh, okay, I'm just gonna like grab this whole, like, how hard can I grab it? I
Dude,
don't know.
totally.
Let's just try as hard as I can. Oh, I can just lock this off. And just this idea of just committing to it with whatever you have, it kind of, I don't know, it just kind of got me. I was like, yeah, I I actually agree that had someone else been my conductor, they probably would have had more success in that climb. That kind of bothers me. So uh I
Yeah.
I will I want to go into, I want to go into maybe some more practical stuff, and the idea of effort. And I like that you think that maybe I skew more towards learning, but I probably, that may be a newer thing. I usually skewed more towards effort, where I'm really good at
Interesting.
just trying freaking hard. And I think that some of the podcast and some of getting older is, and us leaning in, or at least me picking more on this kind of learning mindset stuff, is because it's an area that I have recognized I need to understand better, and I need to be more open. And I enjoy that that I don't know if I get to romp around every gym and do every climb, but I will say that it feels very good to look at a climb, know what to do, and then just do it and just feel strong and good. So I don't know, maybe
Yeah.
I am one of those people, but anyways.
Actually, so it is
Mhm.
interesting. Sorry, on that note, it is really interesting to think about the difference between indoor climbing, outdoor climbing, the board, and for you specifically, like uh, personally, my read on Josh is that he jumps the mindsets based on the style, right? And so in the gym, he probably is doing the vast majority of his climbing in that effort commitment mindset. And maybe if he goes to Rocklands or he goes to, wherever outdoor crag that he likes to, that's also the same mindset as why he likes the South. Maybe he likes that, but then he goes to maybe Squamish or Tahoe or whatever, and sure, maybe there's a couple of climbs in those areas that are really good for that mindset. But then he tries the other one, and then he jumps in that learning mindset, and so that's where I see. I have always described climbing areas as that climbing area requires a language to be able to read that properly. Of course, you can bulldoze it and see certain words and be like, oh, I get it. Yeah, for sure, I get it. I can read it. And I chose to see this as scrolls. I go to the area, I go to Bishop, I go to Chat, I go to somewhere, and I have to discover the scrolls that this area is trying to teach me, and I have to actually learn the language. And before I do that, if I don't do that, I'll never learn it. Of course, you can get through it, get by, send your grades, send your numbers. Fine. Do whatever you want to do, guys. Everyone can do that. I'm not telling anybody how to rock climb. But I am saying that there's a layer underneath that we have an opportunity to read the scrolls and actually understand what this climbing area is trying to teach us and how to read it properly, whether it's a learning mindset, whether it's a committed mindset, and that may be a more effective way to grow in climbing.
Well,
Okay,
and
so before we
to
go into
me,
practical, yeah, yeah,
just to me, that is the major to major in, is this ability to adapt to the situation, because at the end of the day, what we're doing in climbing is fixed, and we have to figure out our way up. And that's part of the beauty. It's why we're anti-chipping in
mhm,
general too, is just, okay, here's the challenge. No one,
right,
no one tells you the right way or the right, they're just, it just is. And so that ability to adapt is really what makes climbing beautiful. And it's why
yeah,
what's really fun about climbing, in my opinion, versus gymnastics, where I had my background, is in gymnastics, there really was a right way to do a move. Like that just, there is the right biomechanical way. And it just always, and then you would just repeat it over and over again, get deeply ingrained. I'm not saying what they're doing isn't amazing and incredible, but it just, I remember going climbing after that, and there was no coach telling me like, you should have heel hooked that instead of toe hooked. I just like, I don't know. I'm going up there, and this is me. But this is where you have to keep, you have to keep going deeper, and you have to keep growing by subjecting yourself to things that aren't intuitive. So everyone has a thing that kind of comes naturally to them, and this is where you've talked about whatever you do with intentionality over time is kind of what makes you into a climber. And so if you are intentionally seeking out things that you cannot do intuitively, you are growing, you are growing as a climber and giving yourself a bigger vocabulary to tackle things both more difficult, but then also more efficiently, because now all of a sudden you have tools even in your style. And I talked about this, how I came back from Squamish and then I was better in the gym. And you think, well, why was that? Like, you were so great in the gym. I don't really know exactly. I can't tell you every little
no, I
thing
love
that
that.
changed it, but that it's just, it was proof positive that exposing myself to things that were not intuitive, that put me into an uncomfortable position, and then maybe letting my ego go a little bit, and just
Hmm.
listening, learning, and then committing, uh, is that loop. It's that loop that we're always talking about. Okay, climb
Yeah,
intuitively. Like, this is you. Oh no, this isn't working. Okay, what can you do different? Okay, see if that works. Oh, it did work. Okay, now that just got added into your intuition, and repeat. Anyways, there
yeah.
you go.
Oh, I love that. I love that. And that this, I think, actually, so on that note, by the way, the idea of intuitive picking or, like learned picking, intentional picking in terms of like what you actually choose to do, there's a balance there. And that's, I think, the grayest area in climbing right now, which is like, do you want things to be directed or do you want things to just feel natural and you just go for them? Like, yeah, in an ideal world, everything feels natural and your body just goes up the easiest path. Is that going to happen? maybe after 100 years of practice, and 100 different styles, and so yes, it is ideal to climb like that. We should strive to climb like that, and we should understand the aspects that's required to climb intuitively. But don't expect it to happen just because you choose to climb intuitively. You're going to be dumb and committed and not look at all the theory, right? And so that's why we're talking about the mixture. Um, okay, optimal execution of this. Ideally, we keep things rational and objective in climbing, right? Like we don't want to have all these feelings. We don't want to have positive or negative feelings. We just want to be objective. We want to be rational and use logic to make decisions in climbing. But because we use feelings, what feels possible to hold, or how much we can pull on this, or what foot feels good or better or worse, as our internal metrics assessment system, we use feelings as our internal metric system in assessment system in climbing. Because of that, we must be very accurate when using this system for conducting our orchestra, right? And that's me saying that using our feelings is probably the best way to say, oh, I feel like I can, create this way. I feel, because all the best climbers do that, right? But because we use that, we have to be very careful about if that's actually from a rational place. Okay, that is the optimal execution of this, is actually seeing what you feel and then assessing that. Again, I can't kind of keep going. Here's another tip: make as many assumptions as possible with good rational thinking. Of course, is kind of going back to that. Josh and I would rather see you try really hard with the wrong thing, and it's fine. Just make assumptions. It doesn't matter if they're incorrect or correct. Just make as many assumptions as possible before any given attempt with good rational thinking. Give a moment to assess personal biases based on factors that might already make you lopsided. For example, if you're really strong at crimping and you're not so good at slopers and pinches, and you read this climb that has crimps, pinches, and slopers, and you're constantly like, oh, well, dude, for sure I'm going to stay on this crimp and I'm going to full, or even better, if you're a full crimper and you don't know how to open hand and you're like, oh, dude, the best way for sure is to, oh, but which one's my personal bias? And okay, interesting. How does that affect? And it's not to say that, always you're going to lean towards this personal bias and that's always the wrong way. That's not what I'm saying at all. It's just be careful of that personal bias and see what it's actually saying, and then try 100%.
On
Yeah,
that,
go
on
for
that
it.
personal bias, I just got to share something that I recognized in myself that I learned also from listening to Ethan Salvo too, is some of my personal bias is to try extremely hard. So it's, if you're trying to deconstruct a move,
Interesting.
often what I will do is, oh, I just need to lock it off a little further. And Ethan, maybe if he was with me in Squamish, he might say, hey, Josh, what if you tried just shifting your hips a little bit to the left and just kind of sinking over into it? And I actually remember this climb in Tahoe where I was trying to pull through this little crimp to get to the next one. And all my friends were just cruising this move. And then I watched them. And what they were doing is they were actually, instead of pulling through the crimp to get to the next one, they were grabbing the crimp, shifting over away from the crimp, like relaxing and then reaching up. And it's just this, like, I know it's obvious sometimes, but again, this is just this bias of who are you? What do you know that you tend to lean towards? And then be careful and try to be more objective, which is impossible. But this is also where
Yeah.
you kind of get this voice in your head. Like I always say that it's not about, you can never really be objective. This is a whole philosophical topic that I won't get into. You can never really be
I
objective,
love that.
but you can recognize your bias and more quickly switch
Yeah.
from what your bias is into something that may help you. And this is where it's good to have friends. And my favorite one is, this is where we talked about that performance under pressure, and when you start getting stressed, how you know that your particular biases may lead towards you taking way off your feet or whatever the case may be. And so now, the more you recognize it, like, yes, you're going to have this subjective experience, but how quickly can you say, okay, but what about how I always do this? So maybe I need to put this under a different lens. And yeah, so I just want to jump in there for that.
Yeah. No, that's so cool because you're also, so Josh is a philosophy major, which for me it's always validating when I say something that I think about how the brain works or something, and you kind of double down on it. I'm like, yeah, that's, it's, for me it's validation because you're a philosophy major and I'm not. I don't know anything about philosophy necessarily. I philosophize in this way, and through my realizations, I realize that nothing's objective in climbing because we have so many feelings as part of our metric system, our metric assessment system. And by metric assessment system, I do mean like what you think you're capable of, which is usually wrong. That's why I was saying that it's better to be like Jesse here in this way, where we just believe our body's capable of anything. And then we just try really hard to match that, because more likely you're going to get your potential than you think that you're capable of something, and it's like, dog, you don't know what you're capable of. You don't even know the best way to get up the wall, and kind of to point on you doing a move and your personal bias was to choose to go for more versus choose for differently. I would say that either one of those ways is incorrect. I would say that you want to be doing both, right? Like you want to be doing a bit of both, right? Ideally, you want to try more and differently at the same time, right? The ideal would have been, because Josh, what you're doing there is something that most people don't do. Most people do the other thing. Most people do the other thing because it's the easiest way out. The easiest way out is to do something differently because that move feels too hard, right? It's harder to embrace how difficult something is and try for it, right? But it doesn't mean that one's more effective than the other. They're both effective and you need to do both, right? And so, like, basically my point there is, could you have done the move your way or their way at a higher rate? I don't know. It just depends. It literally just depends on how creative they are or how strong you are, right? And so we don't want to lean too hard in those ways. That's kind of the whole point of this, is to say we don't want to lean either of those two ways. We want to be using both, right?
Well,
And I do make a
I want to use that as a launching off point for a couple of the actual scenarios in which we find ourselves in, and how we might see that blend of those mindsets. Are you okay with me jumping in on that, or did
yeah,
you?
yeah.
Okay,
I'll just go back to this late after. Yeah.
okay. When you're flashing or on-sighting or in a comp, you definitely have both of these mindsets while you're climbing. Either,
Mm.
literally while you're climbing, it's kind of this blend of both where you have to switch really quickly between them. Actually, I'm going to just use the example of Kalimnos again. That was a good example of, okay, what should I do here? I'm at like a bit of a rest. What do I do? I mean, it could happen even just in the moment super quickly, where you have that moment where you say, okay, I have to be open to everything. Like, is there a foot that I'm not seeing? Like, is there a way to take this crimp where it's more of an underclink? Just really quickly, you look at all these choices and then you say, okay, it's this one, and you commit 100%. Okay. So that's a scenario that we find ourselves in. I just wanted to showcase how those mindsets
Yeah.
may play during it. And then we have projecting, where you're stuck and you're, deconstructing a climb, trying to work it. And there clearly you have a lot of open mindedness, lots of learning, and you want to check off all the different boxes. Like, maybe it's this foot, maybe it's this foot. Okay, I saw a heel hook here, and this is where you pull on, and maybe you're just checking things out, but then you have to decide on a beta, and then you go 100% into that committed mindset where you really find out, is this beta that works? And if it really works well, or you won't even know if it works until you really commit. So that's how that interplays on projecting. And then if you're just kind of cruising around and climbing, just, I don't know, you're romping through the gym like Tim, I would say just climb intuitively and focus on the effort mindset. Maybe you find yourself at a move and you have to be open for a moment while climbing, but there's nothing wrong with just, climbing intuitively with 100% commitment. And that's beautiful and feels really fun. But it's when you fall that you should start adopting that learning mindset. Or if you get to the top and you feel awful, take that as a cue that maybe you should take a step back. And actually, we had someone in our classroom ask us, why are people obsessed with flashing? And he was a bit of a newer climber,
Mhm.
but he talked about how he flashed something and he got to the top and he was like, man, it just felt awful. And to me, that's a cue that, hey, maybe you should take a step back and say, my intuition wasn't quite
Nice.
right. It worked, but was there something for me to learn here? And yes, I committed. Yes, it worked. And you don't have to do that. You can just keep on moving to the next one, and you will get stopped eventually. But these are just kind of tips for that we're trying to give to you, where, how do you know when to apply which? How do they come into play? And again, these aren't all the mindsets that are available in climbing. These are just
Right.
these are tools that we've noticed that we think are helpful.
Yeah, and because by the way, like one aspect of climbing, because yeah, I do a fair bit of flashing in competitions. I do a fair bit of projecting on really, really hard limit things, and I do a fair amount of gym romping where I go around. But I'm also a high baller, which is a very, very, very different mindset. And that's for me, I think at the end of it, why I encompassed everything, because I was like, well, what's the mindset that gets me to highballing? What's the mindset that gets me successfully highballing? And it's a mixture of these two mindsets. It's right in between. If I had too hard one way or the other, I'd probably kill myself. Seriously, like I really mean that. Like if I didn't fix this mindset of myself, I would have killed myself a long time ago, or like hurt myself really badly.
Hold on.
Um,
I actually, I just say that again because I think it shows how dangerous both sides can be in your ability to actually climb well. Because if you are committed 100% with beta that you really have no understanding of, you're going to fall. And if you spend all the time, not really in the moment committed to the mechanics, then you're going to fall. And so I love
yeah,
that when you really just took it to the absolute extreme, but it shows you how important and valuable those things are while climbing.
yeah,
So cool stuff.
yeah. I don't
Well,
need to say it. I
scary
mean, you
stuff.
just said it perfectly. Yeah, I mean, highballing is about not falling. It's actually not about. It's not just about perfecting your execution of the wall. It's also about not falling, which is I've always described this to youth climbers and like people training sport climbing that survival mindset and the defensive mechanisms in climbing can be dangerous, but it only can be, and it usually is dangerous if you don't work on it. But highballing for me taught me how to work on it and actually use it to my advantage and saw all little things that cause me falling, right? Things cause you falling as a climber. You don't just fall sometimes. Some things cause you falling. And of course, things you just fall sometimes. And this kind of next thing I was about to say really shows that. But it's okay. And falling is fine when you just can't do something. But ideally, you work your body to the point where you're capable of almost anything you direct yourself to do, which you think things are possible in climbing. And you just try to make sure that that's replicated consistently. And that truly shows a mastery in climbing. And that's really what I feel that I was trying to explore was mastering climbing to the point where if you put consequences on the line, I actually knew that I wasn't going to fall. And I felt very confident about that stuff. I mean, I was always surprising people with the amount of mileage I would put on these things roped. And I would always say I didn't do much. I sent ambrosia the first day I tried it. Ever. I tried it. I was like, oh man, I
Kids
think I
don't
could
try this at
have
home.
fun on this thing. Kids don't try that at home. I tried the bottom boulder the same day, and I climbed it that night. And it wasn't a choice. It was just like it was very
Kids don't
in the moment.
highball
I
at
was
night.
like, kids don't eyeball at night either. Yeah, I did ambrosia at like
God,
10 p.m. the first
oh
time.
God, just
Okay,
for
back
anyone who
to the
doesn't,
point
just
here.
it's so hard to express. As someone who has been on top of Grandpa Peabody, Ambrosia is so tall, you guys. It is so tall. Yeah, just anyway, I don't want to get into it. I just sometimes I think about Tim, I'm very happy that you're done with focus. I'm very happy you're still with us. You have both legs intact, still, spitting wisdom
Thanks,
on
man.
here. And yeah, good job. Yeah. Anyways, that has nothing to do with
thanks,
anything. I just
thanks,
my
man.
hands are sweaty and scary from even thinking about you on Ambrosia. So good job.
Yeah. Well, so okay. So back to it. It's funny that you just brought up these different scenarios and like where how to kind of navigate those things and see the differences because I make a really general kind of call to action for you guys for the optimal execution of mixing these mindsets to be the proper conductor. And I do say actually very similar to what you just said. I say try 100% with the effort and commitment mind. And then in parentheses, I say, unless you can't get past a threshold of fear or required strength. Those are two scenarios that I see. If you're in a position, you're like, oh, I'm just too scared, or if that move is just too hard, then you poke the learning mind awake for a second. That's what I usually do. What I usually do is I try 100% intuitively with mostly just effort and commitment in mind because I have such a wide base of what I think general concepts work in climbing. I can do that, right? So that's a big given there. But as soon as I'm like, ooh, that's pretty scary. Ooh, that's pretty hard. I just poke the learning mind awake for a second. I look around and I use that learning mind there. And then I shut it off again with my breath work and my SOTs and like whatever I have. And that's some more practical tips. One more note here on the optimal execution of this. Once you're done with an attempt, be careful to go quickly to the emotional state. And we're so quick, myself included, to assess my climbing and, talk shit or, talk about good things and whatnot. But be careful with that. Take some deep breaths, quickly wake up the learning mind and try to remember everything that just happened on the wall. That's when the learning mind is most effective. It's like trying to remember a dream. When you need to think about it right when you wake up. Maybe even having a journal right next to your bed is the best way to remember vivid dreams. And people have talked about this tip in remembering dreams because they go away within, I don't know, like 10 minutes after you dream. I see climbing in the same way, although it's within seconds, it's within minutes after an attempt. Usually I'll ask climbers when I'm coaching them, like, all right, what happened? Whether it was good or bad, whether you fell or you sent, like, what happened? Like specifically, and I'll ask people very specific mechanics, like, okay, well, so we're working on this part of your hip, we were working on this part of the timing over this foot, or pulling through this movement. Did you do it? What happened there? Right? And people are often like, Doc, I don't know. I'm like, well, you don't know, but you didn't even try. right? If you don't try to remember, you're not going to know, right? I don't expect you to know. I expect you to try to remember. And so, huge point for you guys. It's something that I do regularly in my climbing nowadays because it's so difficult. And I'm at the point where I can fall, and I could argue with anybody else watching me climb what I think happened in terms of my body. And I usually am 100% correct of exactly what parts of my fingers dry fire. If my ring finger dry fires, I know my ring finger dry fired. If my foot even just turned 20 degrees to the left while I was doing this move because I biased my knee versus rolling over my foot, I know that. I know what my body is kind of opting towards in terms of survival or choices, and I don't like those things, right? I'm choosing to try to climb optimally and perfectly, and so I do know when it's a little bit off optimal, and it's not. It's so hard to control. So of course, I can't really control that, but be
Okay.
careful to go straight to that emotional state.
Okay. I always love that because I have a tendency to do that. I think everyone does. And I'm just going to leave you with one last kind of scenario that I see in the gym. And like this has happened to me, this has happened to everyone. And I'm just going to use it to showcase how we might use these mindsets to our benefit. I'm just going to paint a picture for you. You see someone climbing on a climb, and there's a jug that they're heel hooking on to do a move, but the jug is too low and they can't reach the move using that heel hook. And they just try it again and again. This is a real thing that I
Hmm.
actually witnessed. And I don't know why I probably saw it like 8 years ago, it just burned in my head. Saw this person just committing everything to this heel hook that was just not going to work. It was just way too far, but it was never going to work. And what you want is to have someone come up, or ideally it happens internally, and you say, hey, Joe, you actually got a high step on this foot and not heel hook. And then you want to see them take the same kind of commitment that they were committing to that heel hook jug that they tried 10
Hmm.
times, giving everything from the ground, trying as hard as they can, coming up short on that next hold, put that right foot up, or whatever, high foot, and then just stand up and do that move first try and go, oh, all that effort I was putting in, I put into this different beta and I committed 100% and it worked. Awesome. So, I'm sure we've all seen this. It blows my mind when I can't tell you how many times I see people trying
Yeah,
beta
same here.
that just, you like, this is where video is good or having buddies is good, is it's just not going to work. Like you just watch, you just say,
Hmm.
look,
Hmm.
man, like this will never work. Um, okay, Tim, I got to wrap because I'm going to go get another massage my back, dude. And hopefully
Nice.
I can feel better. But the conductor side of me is saying, go find help. Yeah.
I have a small list of practical steps that I
Okay.
would love to go over.
Good.
So very, very quickly, and these are really bare bones. There's so many practical steps to talk about when it comes to working on mindset. So really keep in mind that these are not the end all be all answers, but this is what I use at Breathwork. Man, I have not said this enough, man, and I think I have said it enough, but it seems to not get through to people's brains that Breathwork can be the most effective, easy tool to implement in your climbing, and I'll tell you why. I use exhales to teach my body appropriate rhythm and rev control. Okay, what do I mean by that? Deep and slow exhales with an emphasis on disengaging. This allows me to tap into learning mind a bit when I need to, right? You stick a hard movement. Usually for me, it's every movement that I stick. I find an exhale, whether it's deep or whether it's quick. And for different reasons, I find exhales. Pretty much no matter what, boom, set my feet up, move, boom, constant exhales, right? Constant. And if I'm in a longer rest position and I need to get out of this, I rev up, quicker, shallower breaths. And that's just to get more excited to get out of positions. I look for inhales and brace breaths to focus on specific mechanics that actually can get movements done. Focus on the move. Focus on the foot, right? And then that's one practical step at breath work. Exhales and inhales can be used separately. It takes years of practice. And I'll tell you, it actually has taken me years and years of practice to actually feel comfortable using these things, but they can be incredible tools. Uh, Exhales first. For everybody who wants to practice using breaths, don't worry about the inhales so much. Inhales really are for hard movements and teaching yourself specific mechanics. Exhales are far more frequent and far more effective, and also just the lowest hanging fruit that I've seen in 99% of climbers, okay? 99% of climbers, including strong climbers who climb V15. I still watch climbers who I know climb V15 now who don't put exhales into their climbing. And I'm like, wow, how many little tricks are you missing out on, right? Of course, they're doing something right, but they could be using that. Sotting, that beloved power scream. I know there's haters out there for it, and I know there's lovers out for it. I'm not here to talk about that. But sodding helps just tap into the effort mind. It just helps to tap into the commitment mind. There's a lot of layers to this. I know Josh is also a proponent of using some voice in your climbing, but it just helps to quiet the mind, right, Josh? I know you know that that's the effectiveness of sodding. It just helps to tap into that effort mind. It's just so much easier. Love it. The last practical step here is to watch video. Something that Josh went into earlier. Watch your falls. This will tell you clearly what you are committing to and if you were committing, right? It kind of helps to tell you, of course, the learning mindsets things, and helps you assess which betas look rationally possible or look logically possible or not. But I more mean that if you watch your falls and you don't see failure, you don't actually see failure happening in mechanics, maybe you're not tapping into that commitment mindset enough. And so that's really the most important point in terms of watching videos and falls that I want to make point. If you're cutting feet and stuff, your hands should be popping off and there should be tons of tension and trajectory from your body coming off the wall. That's what I look like every single time I fall off the wall.
How many times do you see people? Well, first of all, people will be looking down before they grab the hold, or reach their high point in their movement, and they fall. Often
that's not a fall. Yeah, that's giving up.
Also, often, if people look down before doing the move, you almost know 99 times out of 100 that they're not going to really try hard. That's just. So those are great practical tips for both effort and for learning mindset. Breath work, it's the reason why breath work is so interesting is because we're not in control of a lot of our subconscious things like our heartbeat, but the breath is this interesting thing where it's both subconscious, you breathe without trying, but then you also have a very direct conscious ability to control it. And so that's why it seems to be our window into adjusting our subconscious systems. And the last thing I'm going to say, Tim, because I really got to go, is I apologize. I guess we can always go on deeper on this, but I just wanted to say that we now have Nilo Botley is now opened up spots on our coaching. This should have been part of the announcements, but I just got so swept up. And thank you again to everyone who shared with us those Spotify rap things. But Nilo has finally opened up some spots. One of the most common emails I get is for coaching. We just are jam-packed full. Although maybe 2024 will change that. If anyone's looking for coaching, I'll keep reaching out. We'll add you to the list, and when we have more coaches, we'll get in touch with you. And I just wanted to leave it at that and just say thanks, Tim. I love all of these. Always have a fun talking about all these nuances. I will say that we'll probably talk about more board climbing too in 2024, because boy, did that get a lot of love and response. And so if you're out there, and if there's anything specific in the boards that you want us to tackle, we're psyched. I have a Moonboard in both houses that I am back in my childhood farm and in my home now. So I'm on board. That's a really lame joke there. All right, Tim, I gotta go.
I like that one. All right. Take care, guys. Thanks for listening to the long Testpiece nerdy lecture. But yeah, hope you guys got value out of it. And Josh, I'll see you after I go to Korea. I'm going to Korea this weekend for a week. I'm psyched.
Oh yeah. And, eat big. Galbi Jam. I'm telling you, I'll send you those lists.
Eat big.
Yeah. Love so. And go maybe that's the land of moonboarding too. Okay. All right, Tim. Take care, dog.
Take care. See ya.
Thanks for tuning in. If you'd like to learn more about Testpiece climbing, you can check us out at testpiececlimbing.com and even book a session with one of our coaches.